Chapter 826, Shopping Spree. While the intense and arduous training slowly taught the members of the cohort how to fight together, Sunny had several other time-sensitive tasks to complete. Keeping up with all these concurrent responsibilities really tested his mental capacity, but there was no other choice than to simply grit his teeth and do it. Probably the most important of the tasks facing him was to allocate his contribution points and acquire various assets to strengthen the cohort. However, that was not a straightforward issue. After several days of studying how his subordinates fought and getting acquainted with their memory arsenals, he was finally ready to make some decisions. To do so, he chose a moment when the three members of the melee vanguard, Belle, Dorn, and Quentin, were busy in the dreamscape pods and called his other three subordinates over. After all three of them were specialists in various support fields that had to do with the cohort's equipment. Kim was a technician, Samara was a capable spell-tech engineer, while Luster was supposed to be an ace pilot. That wasn't really useful in this situation. But what was Sunny supposed to do? Leave the poor guy to sulk all alone in a corner? After consulting with Kim and Samara, he gained a lot of insight into what would be the best way to spend the contribution points. The Rhino might have seemed like a simple transport vehicle, but it was really so much more. Sunny did not know a lot about war and strategy, but he knew that mobility was one of the most important factors when determining the impact a combat unit could make. That was especially so for the cohorts of the 1st Irregular Company, which were supposed to be elite rapid response units that had to constantly travel between various flashpoints to provide support to the ground troops. So upgrading their APC was of paramount importance. The question was which aspects of the Rhino had to be upgraded the most. In the end, Sunny settled on several major upgrades. They were not what he had expected to pick before consulting with the pair of tech specialists. Instead of adding more armor to the Rhino's hull or incorporating a powerful cannon to its forward section, most of the improvements ended up being hidden from sight. The Rhino received a comprehensive overhaul that replaced its already formidable power reactor with a much more potent alternative, which in turn demanded the whole energy transmission system to be torn out and replaced with a more robust one. Among other things, this upgrade vastly improved the logistics of the cohort, since the new spell-tech reactor did not need mundane fuel and could be charged by Luster instead. The guy turned out to be useful for something after all. The second major upgrade unexpectedly centered entirely around the command and communication suite situated in the rear of the vehicle. Sunny had not paid it much attention before, but after receiving input from Kim, he understood how important it was to get his hands on a better system. With all the gates opening in Antarctica, communicating with other units and the command HQ of the evacuation army was going to quickly turn into hell. Being able to maintain a stable connection was even more important for the irregulars, since the cohorts were meant to act semi-independently while being coordinated by Master Jet from a distance. Luckily, the upgraded reactor was capable of supplying a lot of juice to the communication suite, so Sunny could easily replace it with a much more advanced and powerful system that hopefully would have no problem punching through the mass of interference. The added external antennas, both the comically tall telescopic one and the more modest parabolic one, could be retracted and hidden beneath the armor at any moment. The third upgrade was the most esoteric and abstruse. It involved extremely advanced spell-tech applications which Sunny did not really understand, so he simply told Samara to choose the best option. It had to do with shielding and insulating the core systems of the APC from the detrimental effects that the nightmare gates produced. Everyone knew that gates messed with technology and electronics in weird ways, but very few people understood how and why. Considering the nature of the chain of nightmares, Sunny had to make sure that the Rhino would not simply stall and die in the middle of nowhere for no apparent reason. So, even though it cost him a painful amount of contribution points, he chose to acquire the most expensive set of countermeasures available. Sunny did not shed a tear only because his subordinates were watching. Before letting the specialists go, he made another acquisition. Knowing what Samara was capable of with the right armament, he decided to enhance her combat performance by getting his hands on the most powerful mundane weapon available to the members of the 1st Evacuation Army. As the result, the cohort became entitled to receive an incredibly powerful, by the standards of mundane soldiers, of course, mechanized rifle. The thing was made of incredibly tough alloy and included various dampening materials to make its internals more resistant to concussive damage. It was as tall as Samara herself and possessed a long, fearsome barrel. Sunny initially thought that the rifle was a railgun, but was corrected and found out that it was actually a different type of a mass driver known as a coil gun or Gauss rifle. He had heard all those words before but had no idea what the difference was, not that it mattered. All he needed to know was that the rifle was incredibly powerful and capable of propelling solid slugs forward with stunning speed. It could also fire them in two modes, subsonic and supersonic, which could be useful if the cohort ever wanted to remain discreet. Technically, the rifle was too heavy and powerful to be wielded by a human. It was meant to be utilized by a soldier encased in a full exoskeleton armor suit, or even serve as a light weapon for the smaller humanoid war platforms. But as an awakened, Samara was just strong enough to manage. After making this acquisition, Sunny let the three specialists go and rubbed his palms together. Then, he went forward and spent his remaining contribution points on miscellaneous items and, more importantly, better memories for his soldiers. As a mad grin appeared on Sunny's face, his eyes shone with greedy light. Staring at his communicator, he couldn't help but laugh. Ungrateful brats. Daddy brought you gifts, hey. Chapter 827, Daunting Task. Sunny spent a lot of time considering what was the best use of the contribution points allocated to him by the army, as far as memories were concerned. He had no doubt that the cohort was going to encounter hordes of nightmare creatures in Antarctica. Hopefully he and his soldiers would survive, which also meant that they would receive a lot of memories, and eventually even echoes, throughout the campaign. Still, most of those abominations were going to be either dormant or awakened. How powerful of a memory could killing such a creature bring? Additionally, any boon received in battle was bound to be arbitrary. Even if it possessed considerable power, who was to say that this power was going to fit the members of the cohort well? So, now was his best and only chance to get his hands on potent memories that perfectly suited his soldiers and himself. However, nothing was ever simple. Despite the fact that the government had been extremely generous, outfitting 6 awakened, let alone a master, was not cheap. If Sunny had not spent the lion's share of contribution points on upgrading the Rhino, he might have been able to acquire a good amount of powerful tools. As it stood, he was desperately short on funds. This was why he had to make several painful decisions. Firstly, he gave up on getting something that he himself could use and chose to concentrate on the needs of his subordinates. That really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Sunny let out a mournful sigh. There was just no denying it. His personal arsenal was already a bit too outstanding. He had to console himself by remembering that his 6 soldiers were, in a sense, an extension of this arsenal. They were meant to become his most powerful weapons. So, empowering them was the same as empowering himself. Secondly, purchasing echoes were also out of the question. Although there were plenty to choose from, the cost was just too high. Sunny might have considered getting one if he could turn it into a shadow, but he already knew that he had to possess the corresponding shadow in his soul sea to transform an echo. So, his main goal was to enhance the equipment of his soldiers in a meaningful way. Sadly, even that was mostly out of his reach now. That was if Sunny did not cheat, of course. But why wouldn't I? An ominous smile appeared on his face. Sunny was in a unique position to get most of what he wanted while spending a vastly smaller amount of contribution points than anyone else would have had to shell out. After all, he was an aspiring sorcerer. Purchasing dozens of powerful memories might have been out of his reach, but with some luck he would not need to. Requesting a powerful ascended sword for Bell would consume a considerable chunk of his remaining contribution points, for example. But purchasing a dormant weapon with a suitable enchantment would not. All he had to do was study its weave, and then transplant the enchantment on the swordsman's current blade. In other words, Sunny planned to treat the memories he purchased as building blocks of powerful tools, as opposed to tools themselves. That way, he could get much more value from the contribution points in his possession. The only disadvantage of this approach was that it would immensely burden Sunny in the coming weeks. Nevertheless, he was willing to try. Even if not all of his attempts of transplanting weaves were going to succeed, he was confident that a sufficient amount would if he chose the right ingredients, of course. Sunny studied the vast list of available memories for a while. then sighed and left the gymnasium. He had to inspect the goods personally. Sometimes it was easy to forget that most awakened did not enjoy his ability to peer into the very essence of memories and receive a handy description of what each enchantment was supposed to do from the spell. That was something that consuming a drop of ichor that had fallen from Weaver's eye gifted him, and while there surely were aspects that allowed a select number of people to do something similar, most awakened simply had to rely on vague feeling and experimentation to unlock the full potential of their memories. It took some convincing to make happen, but eventually Sonny was allowed into the main armory of the army encampment. There he found several dozen of awakened busy with paperwork instead of thousands of memories resting on the shelves, waiting to be allocated to various units. The logistics of the whole system were a true nightmare, since memories could only be transferred in person. As the result, each was assigned to an awakened supply officer who served as a walking arsenal and was supposed to personally deliver the chosen memory to the recipient when requested. Sonny would have looked like a complete fool if he demanded each of these officers to manifest their entire inventories for his perusal, not to mention that such a thing would take forever to complete. Luckily, he had narrowed his selection to a comparatively short list of memories that were both cheap and had great potential. Now, he just had to take a look at them to make sure that the weaves were suitable and easy enough to copy. Sonny had a lot of goals, ranging from comparatively simple to achieve to those that required a great effort on his part and could end in failure. For example, there was a dormant memory that came in the shape of a straight razor. Its only enchantment, according to the description in the government database, made it extremely sharp. Trying to hack and slash nightmare creatures with the tiny blade was a recipe for disaster. But what if he could imbue Belle's sword with the same unnatural sharpness? There was a cloak that had no other purpose than to make its wearer weigh less by a couple of kilograms. In and of itself, the enchantment was not too useful. But what if he applied it to Dorn's unwieldy sledgehammer? Better yet, what if he managed to transplant the Feather of Truth, enchantment of the mantle of the underworld, to it? Even though Sonny still had trouble working with complex weaves of ascended memories, he felt that he had a solid chance of success. What if he could purchase 6 cheap charms and enhance each of them with resistance to cold that the memory of ice provided? Thankfully, he could spend his contribution points to receive soul's shards required for these manipulations as well. Of course, the task was daunting and complicated. Not only did Sonny have to collect all the necessary ingredients, spend a lot of time and essence to create countless strings of essence, study the new weaves, and actually succeed in replicating them, he also had to take other factors into account. The difference between passive and active enchantments, the capacity of the memories being changed, the rate at which his awakened soldiers would have to expend their limited reserves of essence to maintain the more powerful effects, the synergy between them, all of these concerns were enough to drive a person mad. Not to mention that he only had several weeks to achieve this ambitious goal, while simultaneously overseeing the training of the cohort and performing other important tasks. He would probably improve his nascent mastery of sorcery at least. Staring at the confused supply officers, Sonny rubbed his face and groaned. So much to do, damn, is being a captain always so stressful? Chapter 828, The Call. Several days later, Sonny was sitting in the mess hall of the military bunker, consuming a generous portion of food without too much enthusiasm. A couple of other captains of the first irregular company, as well as Master Jet herself, ate with a bit more appetite. Sonny did not look too good. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his whole presence was subdued and listless, a telling sign that someone was running low on essence. At some point, Winter gave him a dubious look and asked, "What's up with you? You look like you're about to topple over." Sonny waved a hand dismissively. "It's nothing. I'm just tired because of all the stuff I have to do before we depart. Being an army officer is not a breeze, as it turns out. Who could have thought?" The woman stared at him for a few moments, then grinned. "Oh, right. I forgot that this is your first command posting. You have yet to discover the wonders of delegation." Master Randall shook his head. "There are many things that can't be delegated. Plus, you have to know what your subordinates can handle to assign them tasks. I think that you're doing fine, kid." Sonny wanted to retort that he was not a kid, but thought better of it after glancing at the grizzled veteran. Vandal was almost old enough to be his grandfather, If anyone had the right to regard him as a junior, it was Master Randall. Winter shrugged. That's true. I am actually impressed by the cohort you've managed to form. It is unexpectedly well-rounded, although I am surprised by several of the choices you made. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Really, why? She leaned back and looked at him. Well, Sunny assumed that she was looking at him. In truth, the laid-back beauty could have been staring at anything from behind her old-fashioned sunglasses. Don't get me wrong, each of us has tried to create a cohort that can remain effective in all kinds of situations. But we have our biases. Nevertheless, so every cohort except yours tends to lean toward a certain specialization. Take Pride, for example. That slippery bastard recruited all the stealthy creeps from the roster. Sunny stared at her without amusement. You do know that I am a creep myself, right? Then, he froze for a moment. Wait, that didn't come out right. What I meant to say was that I specialize in stealth as well. Winter snorted. Really, you don't really look like a backstabber? Sunny crossed his arms and looked at her with a smirk. Well, obviously, if I go around looking like a backstabber, people would be on guard against being stabbed in the back, wouldn't they? That just defeats the purpose. Master Randall let out a gruff chuckle. He makes a good point. Sunny nodded, then let out a heavy sigh. To tell you the truth, I did my fair share of backstabbing in the past, which really helped me survive, but mostly I tend to find myself in situations where I'm surrounded on all sides. Stealth is a powerful tool, but it can only get you so far, so a well-rounded cohort is the best choice in my opinion. Luckily, my aspect is versatile enough to support all kinds of compositions. He lingered for a bit, then asked with curiosity, what do other cohorts specialize in? I've been too busy to keep up with what you guys are doing. Winter took a bite out of her sandwich, chewed it slowly, and shrugged. Ah, the usual. Davis went with a stealthy approach. Venerable Vandal here is all about melee carnage, so is Mustang with the added emphasis on speed and finesse. I am more of a ranged superiority gal. Dale is a bit like you, but with a slant toward robust defense. As for our courageous leader, she looked at Master Jet and smiled. Actually, I have no idea. Her cohort is weird. Soul Reaper gave them a nonchalant glance. It's not that weird. I just picked people who can enhance my own battle performance in various ways. We are meant to wipe out the enemy by channeling our deadliest weapon, me, in the most efficient way. She remained silent for a few seconds. In any case, there are only several days left before we have to board the ships. Once we do, most of our decision power will be gone. Any additional preparations we'll be able to make at sea are going to be limited to a specific direction, so now is your last chance to account for things you might have missed. The captains looked at each other with somber expressions. After a long pause, Sunny asked, Any suggestions? Master Jet thought for a bit. You are not too familiar with how gates affect us, are you? He shrugged. I know the basics, I guess. Randall shook his head. That is not really enough. For us government officers, a big part of our duty has to do with containing the nightmare gates, so we know them the best. You are a master, so you must have experienced the call at least once. Correct? Sunny cautiously nodded. He had indeed experienced the strange pull that both gates and seeds exerted on Awakened. It felt like the nightmare was calling to him. The grizzled veteran continued with a scowl. Well, the call does not just affect the mind. It exerts a very substantial influence on reality as well. Namely, it can mess with your tether and the dream realm anchor. Sunny scratched the back of his head. He knew about that strange anomaly. Of course, he had just never encountered it himself. How severe is the interference? The older master lingered for a second. Not too severe, but it grows worse the closer you get to the gate. In the immediate area around it, the call overrides both the tether and the anchor. What it means is that if you decide to jump into the dream realm near an active gate, you will be pulled toward its seed instead of your citadel. Same goes for the awakened who fall asleep in the vicinity. He paused, and then added, Actually, we often make use of that property. If a gate manifests in a populated area and needs to be closed quickly, we can dispatch a cohort of challengers to the seed through the call. A saint might help out and bring them there immediately, or they can wait until the first wave of nightmare creatures is cleared and take a nap, although that is more dangerous, since the challengers will have to search for each other and the seed in a potentially hostile region of the Dream Realm. Master Jet sighed. That is not important right now. Usually, it is not too difficult to avoid being displaced by the call. All awakened have to do is maintain a bit of distance between themselves and the gate. However, her expression darkened. With how many gates are expected to manifest during the chain of nightmares, who knows what the situation will be? We'll have to keep the potential danger in mind and manage the sleep schedule of our soldiers, lest they are whisked away. I advise each of you to stock up on stimulants at least. Sonny remained silent for a while, thinking. Eventually, he tiredly rubbed his face and said in a somber tone, "I'll take that into account." Chapter 829, Battle Scars. On the second to last day before the departure of the first evacuation army, Sonny and his cohort had nothing much to do. The gymnasium they used had actually been dismantled the previous night, so it was impossible for them to continue training. Of course, Sonny could have come up with an inventive way to put his soldiers through more grief, but he eventually decided against it. Instead, he gathered them on the wall of the port fortress for an improvised picnic. Leaving the northern quadrant was a big occasion, especially considering that they were going to war. This was probably going to be their last chance to relax and enjoy themselves in complete safety, so it would have been a shame to miss it. The cohort enjoyed a lavish meal consisting of various tasty dishes Sonny had commandeered from the officers' mess hall. There were even beverages that were technically prohibited by Army regulations, even though they had very limited effect on awakened. The 7 of them watched as heavy containers were being loaded on the massive ships in wistful silence. Well, at least 6 of them did. Luster, meanwhile, was secretly ogling Samara. After a few moments of silence, the tall woman suddenly said in an even tone, "What are you staring at?" The young man flinched and awkwardly looked away. That's a wicked scar you have. How did you get it, Sam?" Samara indeed had a prominent scar that stretched all the way from her shoulder to her forearm. Since the sleeves of her bodysuit were currently rolled up, a part of it was on display. She briefly glanced down at her arm, then shrugged. "When I was around your age, there was a gate that opened on top of an unfinished city barrier. As one of the closest awakened to the site, I was among the first responders. We held the nightmare creatures off while the construction crews were evacuating. Anyway, there was an explosion, and I was thrown over the edge. Luckily, my arm got caught on some scaffolds. It hurt like hell. But at least I didn't fall all the way down to the ground and turn into a puddle." Luster blinked a couple of times, then grinned. "That's nothing. I actually had my entire right arm bitten off once. A giant stone worm somehow tunneled under the citadel I was anchored in, and then emerged from underground, swallowing the gateway in one go. Those of us who survived had to fight it off, but then got stuck on the pieces of rubble, surrounded by a swarm of smaller worms." He paled a little, smaller compared to the first one, of course. Each was at least 10 meters long, actually. The only good thing about the bastards was that they could only move through soil, so we were safe as long as we remained on top of big chunks of stone. We did so for a couple of weeks, but when our food and water were gone, we had to make a run for it. I killed an entire worm myself, but not before the damned thing gobbled up my arm. Luster was fortunate that he had lost his limb in the dream realm. Although it must have caused a lot of damage to his physical body, he had not been crippled for life. The young man looked around and gave Belle a cocky smile. "What about you? What's the worst you've been hurt, huh?" The swordsman thought for a bit. "Well, I guess it was a few years back. I was stationed at a remote research outpost all the way out there in the wilderness. We had a gate open nearby, and the entire facility ended up being overrun. I was pretty much the only one to survive, but the nightmare creatures were on my heels. I had no means to contact the HQ as well, and the nearest human settlement was 1,000 kilometers away." An amused smile appeared on his face. "It took me about a month to reach it on foot. The pursuing abominations were easy enough to deal with, but the air, suffice it to say, by the end of it, I was constantly coughing out chunks of my lungs. That was the worst I have been hurt. Luckily, a kind ascended healer lent a hand to help me recover." A disturbed silence settled over the cohort. A few moments later, Dorn suddenly snorted. "That reminds me of my solstice. The very first nightmare creature I stumbled upon managed to thoroughly crush both of my legs. I had to drag myself through the mud for 2 entire weeks of slow, painful crawling to get to the nearest citadel. That was many years ago, of course, but no abomination has managed to do such a number on me ever since. Since everyone seemed in the mood to boast about their battle scars, Quentin hesitated for a bit, and then decided to share a story as well. I was captured by a nightmare creature that looked like a giant spider once. It put me in an impenetrable cocoon and filled it with digestive fluid to turn me into an easily consumable slushy, as spiders do. The problem was, I was able to heal myself a little bit faster than the acid was dissolving me. Still, after several weeks of that, my patience grew really thin. Kim looked at him in horror. "Hey, how did you escape?" The gallant man smiled. "Well, while the acid was slowly corroding my body, I was slowly corroding the cocoon. It gave out before I did, fortunately. However, I failed to avenge the other victims and kill the spider. It is still out there somewhere. I hope we'll meet again one day." Kim looked down and then sighed. "I was actually never hurt too badly. There was this one time when my entire cohort contracted a strange plague, though. It was a really torturous disease, and it quickly spread to the entire citadel. Many people died in agony. Eventually, we found out that the plague was a manifestation of a bizarre terror. Once we did, a saint of the great clan's song arrived and somehow managed to destroy it. I, as well as those who were still alive, were spared." Luster patted the young woman on the shoulder. "You did well, Kimmy." Then, he looked at Sunny, hesitated for a few moments, and cautiously asked, "What about you, Captain? Have you ever been hurt real bad?" Sunny scratched the back of his head. "Oh, let me think. I had my ribcage crushed once, I guess. I was also disemboweled, poisoned, burned, and drowned. One time I was even burned and drowned at the same time." Luster blinked. How could anyone be burned and drowned at the same time? Sunny gave him a lively smile. "Easy. You just need to be drowned in molten metal. But the very worst physical wound I have ever received, huh? Has to be getting beheaded, I guess. That one really stung. Honestly, I do not recommend getting decapitated if you can avoid it. It's really not worth it in most cases." The 6 awakened were staring at him with strange expressions. Sunny cleared his throat. "What? It truly isn't. Trust me, I should know." Chapter 830, Departure. The next day, the exodus of the first evacuation army from the northern quadrant finally started. Sunny and the other captains observed the mass of humans, machinery, and cargo containers flowing into the seemingly bottomless cargo holds of the 40 metal leviathans from the tall walls of the port fortress. None of the 6 spoke, consumed by somber thoughts. Master Jet remained silent as well. Behind them, the large encampment that had been bustling with activity just a few days ago was completely dismantled and gone. In front of them was the endless gray expanse of the sea and an uncertain future. Even though only a quarter of the entire evacuation contingent was sailing south from this port today, the scope of it all was truly immense. Looking at the fearsome ships and the flood of soldiers boarding them, Sunny couldn't help but feel a bit of awe. It was easy to believe that nothing would be able to stop such a tremendous force. However, he knew better. After a while, Master Jet sighed. "All right, it's time for us to go. Regroup with your cohorts and proceed to your assigned ships. You know what to do if the convoy encounters a disaster on the way. Try your best to survive. Should the flagship go down, and I with it, follow the chain of command. Vandal is going to assume leadership over the company in my absence." Master Randall glanced darkly at her and grimaced. "Hopefully I won't need to." Even though the convoy was going to be guided by the emissaries of the House of Night, it was not a given that all ships would reach Antarctica. Naval navigation was always dangerous, and most of the awakened and ascended of the First Army were all but useless in aquatic combat, including Sunny. Glancing at his colleagues one last time, he stepped through the shadows and appeared near a crowded dock. It was not hard to find the members of his cohort, since most people gave them a bit of space out of respect. Walking up to them, he put on a confident mask and asked in a relaxed tone, "Are you ready?" Everyone nodded except for Luster, who suddenly seemed concerned. Actually, I've never been on a ship. I won't get seasick, right?" Sunny stared at him for a few moments, then shrugged. You are an awakened, are you not? Awakened are supposed to be resilient to such things. So we'll see, I guess. Luster's face dropped. He lingered for a few moments and sighed. Somehow, I feel like you don't like me very much, Captain. Sonny did not respond. However, Bell suddenly patted the young man on the shoulder. Well, I, for one, am very happy that you're with us. Luster beamed. Really? The swordsman gave him a friendly smile and nodded. Sure. People like you are very valuable to have around. I mean, one look at you, and it's clear that you are going to die first, which therefore means that it won't be me. I feel better already. The young man glowered at him and scoffed. Don't joke like that. It's not funny. Bell blinked a couple of times. I wasn't joking. Meanwhile, Sonny shook his head and turned away to hide a smile. Enough talking. Let's go. Together, they entered the long pier and moved toward the distant ship. The mass of people parted to let them through and then closed behind them like water. It felt a little surreal. Soon, the solid steel mass of the battleship obscured the sky. Feeling its thick shadow embrace him, Sonny suddenly felt a little calmer. He glanced at the gray waves below, sighed, and stepped on the wide link span connecting the pier to the massive vessel. A few seconds later, the dark maw of the cargo hold swallowed him and his people. Once aboard the ship, the cohort split to perform several tasks. Kim, Luster, and Samara went to check on the supplies allocated to the cohort, including the modified Rhino, which had already been stored in a special cradle in one of the lesser cargo holds of the giant vessel for some time. Since they had had no access to it prior to today, there was a multitude of checks and diagnostics they had to run. Bell, Dorn, and Quentin followed one of the ship's logistical officers to secure the living quarters for the cohort and get the lay of the land, while Sonny wandered off to the upper deck. There, he walked close to the edge and leaned on the tall handrail, looking down at the distant surface of the water. Images of the forgotten shore and the dark sea rose from the depths of his memory, making him shiver. As Sonny waited for the fleet to depart, his shadows explored the battleship. Even if he would not be too useful, should a swarm of nightmare creatures or some colossal horror of the depths attack the convoy once in transit, he was still determined to memorize every nook and cranny of this giant steel coffin, just in case. The prospect of handing his life into the hands of strangers did not appeal to Sonny, to say the least. But he did not have a lot of choice. For the next 2 to 3 weeks, the crew of the battleship and the nightwalkers in charge of the convoy were going to decide whether all of them lived or died. Curses. Sonny was suddenly very unhappy with the fact that he did not acquire any powerful swimming-related memories. Even if they could only give him an illusion of being safe, it would have been still better than nothing. Maybe I should make it a priority once we reach Antarctica. I doubt that this is the last time I have to traverse vast amounts of water. Come to think of it, isn't it strange that I, of all people, have neglected seafaring so much? After spending so much time trying to escape the dark sea, even a complete fool would have learned to respect water. But maybe that was the reason. On the forgotten shore, Sonny had grown very accustomed to equating depths to death. He had never considered the sea as anything else because of that. Slowly, the last stragglers of the first evacuation army boarded the metal leviathans. The gates of the cargo holds were closed, the hatches were fastened, massive chains rattled as the anchors were raised. The whole battleship beneath him vibrated as its mighty reactors came to life. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, the convoy started to move. 40 mountains of alloy and steel sailed forward, their bows cutting the waves like giant blades. Thousands of people moved in their metal bellies, breathing life into the iron beasts. Sonny looked as the port fortress slowly grew smaller and smaller. Soon the shore became veiled in a murky haze. The first evacuation army had left the northern quadrant. Chapter 831, Master Knive. After a while, nothing surrounded the convoy but the vast expanse of rolling waves. The 40 colossal vessels moved in a narrow formation, with the fearsome flagship serving as the arrowhead of the expeditionary fleet. Hundreds of formidable cannons were aimed in all directions, their fields of fire overlapping to create a lethal exclusionary zone around the procession. Nevertheless, Sonny was not reassured. He stared at the undulating surface below for some time, a dark expression never leaving his face. Despite the grandiose magnitude of their passage, the convoy moved with a surprising measure of quietness. If not for the sound of water being displaced by the mighty bows and splashing against the alloy armor, Sonny could have closed his eyes and imagined that there were no other ships around him. Wasn't it strange that he had felt much more comfortable aboard flying ships than these far more reliable seafaring vessels? He sighed, then activated his communicator and accessed the Maritime Safety Procedures Manual provided to each member of the First Army. In the past weeks, everyone had to study the sizable document and run a few exhausting drills to familiarize themselves with the strange rules of proper naval conduct. Sonny had a better memory than most, so he practically learned the manual by heart. While its general structure was rather easy to understand and explained what passengers of the ships had to do if a ship or fleet-wide alert was issued, there were a lot of strange and seemingly esoteric rules included as well. For example, the manual had passages like, if you start to experience recurring nightmares or experience persistent auditory hallucinations, report to the nearest Navy officer immediately, or in case of alert level being raised to condition black. Cease all activity and motion. Do not produce any sounds, disturbances or vibrations. Do not summon memories, and above all else do not actively circulate soul essence, and so on. There were several alert levels differentiated by their color. Condition black was among the highest and most dire, inferior only to condition red, which meant that the whole fleet had to prepare for an all-out battle. However, there were plenty of regulations that fell outside these established routines. Even though Sonny had no idea what most of these rules were supposed to prevent from happening, he felt a little bit calmer knowing them. Ships move between the quadrants all the time. Hell, there are even some that constantly travel between West Antarctica and South America. There's no reason to worry too much. He sighed, then shook his head dejectedly and decided to leave the upper deck. Whether Sonny liked it or not, he was going to have to spend the next several weeks at sea. Letting paranoia get the best of him would not do anyone any good. There was a lot for him to accomplish still, from checking up on the Rhino to finding out what kind of facilities would be available to the cohort during this dangerous cruise, and implementing changes to the training plan. Not to mention the fact that he had to continue upgrading and augmenting the memories of his soldiers. As he walked toward the nearest hatch, Sonny suddenly spotted a lone figure standing at the bow of the ship, gazing at the vast expanse of water as he himself had been just a minute ago. The man was tall and wore a midnight blue coat that moved slightly in the wind. Beneath it was a black bodysuit, much like the one Sonny was wearing, but also slightly different. It was made out of a strange material and looked much more like a wetsuit than a garment meant to be worn under armor. Although the stranger stood some distance away, Sonny could somehow feel his presence all the way near the hatch. It was subdued, deep, and mysterious, tantalizing even. Sonny had no doubt that he was looking at another master. He hesitated for a few moments, then shrugged and decided to approach the unfamiliar ascended. As he did, the man turned around and glanced at Sonny with a wary gaze. He was around 30 years old, handsome, and with eyes of an unusual, beautiful indigo color. Strangely enough, his black hair also seemed to possess slight accents of dark blue, at least when exposed to direct sunlight. This close, the feeling of mystifying depth radiating from the stranger was more pronounced, as if most of him was hidden from sight. Sonny already had an idea of who he was looking at. He thought for a bit, and then simply said, "Good day. I am Ascended Sunless of the First Awakened Irregular Company." The man lingered for a moment, studying him. His indigo eyes seemed to be searching for something. Then, unexpectedly, a wide smile appeared on his handsome face. "Ah, I am Ascended Knave of the House of Night." He stared at Sonny with a strange expression for a few moments, and then suddenly blurted out, "Are you crazy?" Sonny blinked a couple of times. Knave, meanwhile, laughed and waved his hand in the air a couple of times. Sorry, I didn't. It's just that my daughter is your biggest fan." "What?" Utterly flabbergasted, Sonny stared at the scion of the famed great clan knight, while trying his best to appear calm and composed. Eventually, he shifted slightly and forced out a question. "How old is your daughter, if I may ask?" Knave smiled. "She's 5. A Song of Light and Darkness is her favorite movie. She must have watched it 100 times. The censored version, of course. She just adores your character. You're her idol. Ah, I really do apologize, Master Sunless. Please forgive my lack of decorum. I just got excited. The scion of the House of Night remained silent for a few moments, then suddenly produced a piece of synthetic paper and a pen from somewhere and offered them to Sunny. Sunny looked down with a deadpan expression and raised an eyebrow. What am I supposed to do with these? Master Knave stared at him for a long, awkward moment. That can I get an autograph, please? You know, to earn some points with my daughter. Chapter 832, Heirs of the Storm. Sunny knew how to write, of course. That said, he certainly did not have a lot of experience writing by hand, let alone had a signature. Simply because people at large, and especially those in the outskirts, almost never used paper and pens to relay information. Why would they, if everything was usually stored digitally? However, he was in a better position than most. Out there in the dream realm, many long-abandoned traditions had found a new life, so Sunny managed to scribble down his name on the piece of synthetic paper with at least some semblance of finesse. Handing it back to Master Knave of Night, he smiled awkwardly. Here. I hope your daughter likes it. The scion of the great clan received the piece of paper with gratitude and hid it in the pocket of his coat. Thank you very much. I am away a lot, so this will go a long way. Next time I see her, she will probably already be 6 and terribly peeved that I've been gone for so long. Coming back with a present is bound to help. He looked at Sunny with genuine mirth. Then, a knowing spark gleamed in his strange indigo eyes. Knave gestured at the ocean and asked, "You are not too comfortable on water, are you?" Sunny lingered for a moment, then scoffed. "You must have seen the movie yourself. Is it really a surprise that I have a complicated relationship with the sea?" The handsome master smiled. "Oh yes. I haven't thought about that, sorry. Still, at least you are familiar with it. Most people just don't understand." He did not have to say what exactly it was that people failed to understand. For a moment the two men shared a strange feeling of closeness. Both had known the unfathomable dread of the depths, which was a rare thing these days. Sunny sighed, then studied the massive silhouettes of the iron ships for a few moments and asked, "So what are our chances of making it to Antarctica alive?" Knave laughed. "Well, I wouldn't worry too much if I were you. Sure, anything can happen, but this convoy is as safe as we can make it." He pointed to the especially fearsome dreadnought that moved in front of the fleet. "There is a saint of the House of Night aboard the flagship. There are several nightwalkers such as I spread around the other ships. There are also at least one cohort of experienced awakened warriors of my clan on each vessel. We know what we are doing, so very few things can threaten the fleet. It will reach Antarctica, have no doubt." The scion of the great clan lingered for a moment, then added in a more somber tone, "We will have to make the journey many times, bringing the refugees away and returning with reinforcements for the government army. Each of the 4 fleets was made to be nearly indestructible. Still, that doesn't mean that our passengers can relax. Keep your wits about you, Master Sunless, and do remember the rules formulated in the safety manual. We put them there for a reason." Sunny looked at the handsome man and smiled. "Oh, you don't have to worry about that. I have already memorized the whole thing, more or less. I may be lacking in many regards, but being unreasonably paranoid is not one of them." Knave smiled. "That is a truly remarkable trait to have. I wish more people were that unreasonable." Sunny chatted with the Nightwalker for a few more minutes before taking his leave. Master Knave had turned out to be unexpectedly friendly and pleasant to be around. He was not at all like the arrogant representatives of the other great legacy clans. By the end of their talk, Sunny felt a lot better about his current circumstances. He had also grown a bit fascinated with the House of Night. The third great clan had always been a mystery to him. Nightwalkers did not enjoy the patronage of a sovereign, but wielded an irreplaceable power. That unique advantage had carved a place for them at the very top of human hierarchy. But what was that advantage exactly? After meeting a scion of the great clan Night in person, Sunny all but confirmed his suspicion. The feeling Knave gave him was somewhat similar to what he had experienced twice before, one time in the shrine at the 4th level of the Ebony Tower, the other time in the Great Hall of the Night Temple. Both were dedicated to Storm God, the deity of depths, oceans, darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster. The aspects of the goddess of the black skies were all eerily related to the role the House of Night played in human society, and Sunny did not think that it was a coincidence. His previous guess seemed to have been correct. It was all but certain now that the founder of the great clan, an enigmatic awakened of the first generation known as Nightwalker, had inherited the lineage of Storm God and somehow shared its power with the rest of the House of Night. So then all 6 divine lineages are accounted for? House of Night had inherited the lineage of Storm God. Immortal Flame had inherited the lineage of Sun God. Valor had inherited the lineage of War God. Song had most likely inherited the lineage of Beast God. That was clear from what he knew about Seishan, the adopted daughter of Ki Song. Sunny had been meant to inherit the lineage of Shadow God, but it was devoured by Blood Weave. That only left the most elusive of the 6 divinities, Heart God, and the most elusive of the sovereigns, Asterion. Of course, Sunny could be wrong. Ki Song might have been the heir of Heart God instead, while Asterion might have been the heir of Beast God, or lacked a lineage entirely. But what were the chances? That is all great. But what the hell does it all mean? What were divine lineages exactly? Did they have any purpose except for bestowing their wielders with additional power? Were they just chance remnants of ancient bloodlines, or something that had been left behind for a reason? More importantly, now that one of the 6 divine bloodlines had been hijacked by the forbidden lineage of a meddling daemon, how would that affect things? Sunny had no idea. Shaking his head, he descended into the metal depths of the giant battleship and reunited with his shadows, which had been exploring the vessel all that time. One way or another, I will find out later. Right now, however, I should really go and take a look at the rhino. Sunny hastened his steps and scowled. After all the contribution points I sank into it, the damned thing better be good. Chapter 833 Rhino. The vehicle stable of the battleship took up a whole lesser cargo hold. Calling it lesser, of course, did not do the space justice. It was a vast metal hall filled with all types of heavy machinery and bustling human activity. Feeling the floor sway slightly beneath him, Sunny walked along various cradles, each holding a powerful engine of war, until he reached the one assigned to his cohort. There, he finally saw the rhino. Sunny remained motionless for a while, studying the formidable vehicle. The armored personnel carrier was angular and stocky, with heavy plates of composite alloy armor covering its solid frame. Its design was stout, sleek, and strangely predatory. The whole machine was almost the size of a train car, with 6 mighty wheels supporting its overbearing weight. Each massive wheel was as tall as a human and as tough as the alloy hull of the rhino. A lot of engineering went into making the APC as mobile as possible. Not only were the wheels connected to an extremely robust suspension system, they were also attached to a set of short integrated limbs that could be extended from the frame of the vehicle to raise its profile and maneuverability. The APC also possessed powerful boosters that allowed it to sustain brief bursts of autonomous levitation, hop over short distances, or soften the blow of landing from height. It could even move across water as an amphibious vessel, not that Sunny had any plans to do so. The feature that gave the rhino its peculiar name was a massive steel wedge that was raised slightly above its wide snout. This plow could be lowered down to the ground, turning the APC into a semblance of a heavy siege ram. With this sharp catcher lowered, the alloy beast looked like it was capable of tearing through walls, piles of debris, natural obstacles, and the flesh of the nightmare creatures with equal ease. Sunny studied it with a dark sense of glee. Well, all right. I have to admit, it does look good. He lowered his eyes and looked at Kim and Samara, who were busy inspecting the vehicle. He walked over to his technicians and asked in a neutral tone, "So, what's the status?" Samara glanced up from the screen of her communicator, where a diagnostic program was displaying the results of a series of complicated tests. She offered him a small smile. "Everything seems to be in order, Captain. He's a real beast." Kim affectionately patted the surface of the APC, which had been painted in a gray camouflage pattern. "This is a superb machine. Rhino is really fast despite being burdened by heavy armor, highly maneuverable, and has exceedingly durable internals. With the expensive upgrades we procured, he has become nothing short of a beast, indeed. Sunny blinked a couple of times, coming to terms with the fact that his personnel carrier was, apparently, a he. Kim, meanwhile, shifted from foot to foot and said in a tentative tone, would you like to take a look inside, Captain? Sunny looked at her nonchalantly and shrugged. Sure, of course I want to take a look inside. What kind of question is that? He entered the Rhino through an opened hatch, climbed a set of steep steps, and found himself in the interior of the massive vehicle. Everything there was Spartan, highly utilitarian, and designed with maximum durability in mind. It was clear that he was inside a military machine, and yet Sunny couldn't help but feel that he was surrounded by pure luxury. Maybe it was because he knew how much all this seemingly unassuming equipment cost. The front of the Rhino was dedicated to a slightly raised pilot's cabin, where Luster was currently studying various control panels and switches with an excited expression. There was enough space in there for a couple of additional seats as well. The reinforced windshield was long and narrow, but offered almost a panoramic view of the surroundings. Of course, there were plenty of monitors displaying the feeds from various external cameras and sensors as well. The middle of the vehicle was dedicated to a modest living space. There was a small lounge area where the crew could rest and spend time together, a compact galley, and a partitioned hygiene compartment. 6 sleeping nooks were situated on the opposing walls. Sunny could already imagine the competition for who would get the bottom bunks. Of course, each of these bunks could actually function as a dedicated sleeping pod, should the need arise. Behind the lounge area was a cargo hold that also served as the armory and integrated a high-tech engineering workstation. The engineering compartment itself was situated below the floor and ran the whole length of the vehicle. Finally, the very back of the Rhino was taken by the command and communication suite. There was a large holographic table, a powerful console connected to the antennae array of the APC, and a set of monitors that received the same input as the ones in the pilot's cabin. Most importantly, behind all that was an alcove where Sunny's own bed was situated, complete with a privacy partition and a dedicated storage space. The mattress was the very best the first evacuation army could offer. He grinned, imagining how pleasant it would be to sleep on that thing. This is actually better than what I have back home. Such an addition was not simply to please the officers. As an ascended, Sunny possessed an ability that his soldiers lacked. He did not have to travel to the dream realm every time he fell asleep. What it actually meant was that his soldiers were going to be utterly defenseless while they slept. Even if a swarm of nightmare creatures attacked the Rhino, they would not wake up. He was the only one who could guard the cohort no matter what happened. A staggered sleeping schedule was supposed to help with this problem to a degree, but Sunny had no illusions about how often he would get the opportunity to properly rest, which meant that the rare occasions when he did get a chance to take a nap had to be as comfortable and efficient as possible. Sunny walked around the Rhino for a bit, trying to suppress a satisfied grin as he studied the layout. Eventually, he approached his personal alcove and sat down on the soft bed. There, he glanced at his shadows and smiled. Not bad, huh? The shadows stared at him silently. A few moments later, the happy one energetically raised both hands, showing him 2 thumbs. Sunny nodded. Yes, indeed. I like it too. Chapter 834. Cohesion. Over the next few days, Sunny slowly grew somewhat accustomed to life aboard a giant, floating metal coffin. Of course, the thought of being separated from the bottomless abyss of dark water by just a few layers of alloy was not too comforting, but at least he did not think about it too much anymore. What helped Sunny the most was the fact that he was simply too busy to entertain frivolous thoughts. His schedule was packed to the limit. There was so much he had to do. Most of his days were still dedicated to trying to improve the level of cooperation between the members of the cohort. Now that they had left the northern quadrant, there was no spacious gymnasium for them to practice in. The Dreamscape pods were a thing of the past now, too. Of course, there were some facilities available on the giant battleship, as well as the whole upper deck, but none of it was sufficient to put 6 elite awakened fighters through the paces. Still, there was a lot they could do to learn how to work well together. From low-intensity training to mental exercises and games, anything that could give the members of the cohort a glimpse into how their comrades thought and acted was a step in the right direction. Sunny's insights that he had gained thanks to Shadow Dance helped a lot. as well. Slowly but surely, his soldiers were clicking together and learning how to fight side by side. Bel's swift and mercurial nature, Dorn's solid and calculated approach, Quentin's stalwart persistence, Samara's steadiness and deadly aim, Kim's mastery of sight and quiet competence, Luster's spirit and inexhaustible bravado guided by Sunny, all of it was slowly melding together. The cohort had not reached the point where they could move as a single organism yet, but at least they were already able to reinforce each other's strengths while simultaneously covering each other's weaknesses. Sunny had gained a deeper understanding of their powers as well. For example, Bel's ability to sharpen his sword was actually more complicated than he had thought. As it turned out, the actual effect surrounded the blade with an incredibly thin, invisible displacement field instead of actually making the edge sharper. Kimmy could not only share visual perception between several people, but also mix and match it as the situation demanded. She could see the weaknesses of the enemy, but simply channeling her point of view to a fighter in the middle of furious battle would have been too disorienting. Instead, she was able to transfer only the vision of the vulnerabilities, almost like a composite overlay that lighted the chosen spots up. Luster could speed up the soul essence recovery, both for himself and his allies. Strangely enough, the better he knew a person, the more distance he could maintain between himself and the target while channeling the beneficial effect. If there was one flaw to his ability, it was that it did not seem to work on Sunny. As it turned out, Shadow Essence did not react to Luster's presence at all, which was a big disappointment, considering that Sunny had stripped himself of Serpent's support in order to protect Rain. Damnation. Why did I even recruit this fool? Despite being upset, Sunny had to reluctantly admit that this was not a big issue. Luster's unique and useful ability would not have had a great effect on him, anyway. The young awakened was not able to dramatically affect the much more potent essence of a master, let alone of an abnormal one who possessed 4 cores. When Sunny was not training his cohort, he was busy modifying their memories. The process was long, arduous, and complicated, but he was steadily making progress. He had imbued Bel's sword with a potent but passive sharpening effect of the enchanted straight razor. He had somehow managed to transfer the feather of truth, enchantment of the mantle of the underworld, to Dorn's sledgehammer. The latter was an especially incredible achievement, considering that the weave of the onyx armor was one of the most intricate and complicated he had ever seen. Even more impressive were the 6 charms that he had presented to the members of the cohort. Each carried an altered version of the single enchantment of the memory of ice, which was supposed to raise their resistance to cold. While the effect was much weaker than that of his personal charm, that was exactly what made this accomplishment so important. It was the first time Sunny succeeded in not only copying an enchantment, but also modifying it. Although the memory of ice was more powerful, it was an ascended charm that devoured a lot of essence to sustain its effect. The version Sunny imbued into the 6 weaker charms was more modest, but also much less demanding. His awakened soldiers were going to be able to keep it active more or less permanently, unless their reserves were completely drained. If there was one thing that he had failed to do, it was turning Samara's destructive rifle into a memory. Sunny had really wanted to, but no matter how hard he tried, the high-tech weapon was just too intricate, complicated, and contained too many moving parts. There was a limit to what Sunny could achieve. The more complex the structure of the object was, the larger its size and mass, the harder it was to integrate the rudimentary weave into it. Perhaps if he knew more, he would have known how to overcome this limitation. But as things stood, Sunny had to abandon this particular ambition. Oh well. His dreams of turning the rhino into a memory were utterly shattered. It had already been a week after the departure from the northern quadrant. Sunny was currently in his private cabin, sitting on the bed as he stared dejectedly at the heavy rifle. The battleship vibrated subtly around him, but its corridors were enveloped in silence. This far into the night, most members of the First Army were fast asleep. Sunny himself had not slept in a long while. Of course, as an Ascended, he could easily last a week without sleep. The problem was that it was already his 2nd week. Or was it 3rd? With a sigh, he put the heavy rifle aside and threw the unused soul shards into the maw of the covetous coffer. To hell with it. I need some rest. He yawned and put his head on a soft pillow. Suddenly, all the exhaustion of the past weeks descended upon him, making his thoughts slow and sluggish. A few moments later, Sonny was already asleep, and after what felt like a minute, he was rudely awoken by a loud and persistent sound. Irritated, he turned on his other side and tried to dive back into the rejuvenating darkness. Bastards, quiet down. But no matter how hard Sonny tried to continue to sleep, he couldn't. After a while, he sat up and listened to the noise with a resentful expression on his face. He could clearly hear several voices. By the sound of it, they all belonged to young women. And these women were... Sonny gritted his teeth. Singing? Who the hell sings in the middle of the night? People are trying to sleep here, damn it. Chapter 835, Siren's Song. Sonny sat silently on his bed for a while, irritated by the fact that someone had disturbed his sleep. With singing no less. Slowly, however, his expression softened. Well, at least they have good voices, yeah. The young women sang beautifully. Their voices flowed and resonated with each other, creating harmonies that made him feel tingly. The song was neither sad nor happy. Instead, it made Sonny feel a deep, poignant longing. A wistful sigh escaped from his lips. Maybe I should go introduce myself. Since these beauties were having a party, surely they wouldn't mind some company. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then frowned. Slowly he looked down and studied his shadows, which were silently trembling. His face darkened. There is just this one problem. How the hell was he able to hear the singing so clearly? His cabin was separated from other neighboring compartments by thick alloy bulkheads. The entrance hatch was securely fastened, isolating him from the rest of the battleship. No sound should have been able to penetrate inside so easily. Suddenly, an old memory surfaced from the depths of his mind. For some reason, Sonny remembered how the members of the cohort had sealed their eyes with wax before traversing the dark river below the hollow mountains. Odysseus. His frown turned into a deep scowl. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then summoned the undying chain as the lusterless bleak steel of the slender armor weaved itself from light and encased his body. His thoughts seemed to have turned a little clearer. The chains of longing enchantment provided the wearer with a high amount of protection against mind attacks. However, contrary to his expectation, the beautiful singing was not affected at all. Sonny could still hear it clearly. He still felt moved by the alluring voices. Wait, what language are they singing in? Strangely, Sonny found himself unable to understand the words of the melodious song. Even stranger, he had somehow failed to notice that fact earlier. The words of the unknown language seemed to seep straight into his mind, unobstructed. They echoed and resonated with each other there, making him feel a bit weird. However, their influence was not invasive or harmful. Instead, it was rather pleasant. Sonny blinked. I'm hearing voices. Then, he tilted his head a little. Does hearing voices constitute an auditory hallucination? Wasn't there a rule concerning exactly these circumstances in the safety manual? Right. He was supposed to immediately inform the nearest Navy officer in case something like that happened. Sonny sighed, then stood up. No matter how much his heart desired to meet the beautiful singers, there was no way he was going to follow the call of their soothing song. There was already someone who was aggravatingly adept at tugging on his heartstrings. His heart was all but overcrowded. Sonny left the cabin and went to find an officer to report his hallucinations to. After a few steps, his foot suddenly made a splash, as if it landed into a shallow puddle. Looking down, Sonny saw a thin layer of clear water covering the floor of the passage ahead of him. His scowl deepened. It was still night, so the passageways of the colossal battleship were mostly empty. Of course, activity never ceased on a vessel of this size. The crew slept in shifts to make sure that a complete complement of sailors and specialists always tended to its internal systems and manned the posts. One such post was right ahead, behind a corner. There was not a soul around, and the thin layer of water made Sonny feel uneasy. After hesitating for a moment, he sent one of his shadows to take a look. To his relief, the security checkpoint seemed in perfect order. A junior officer in a blue uniform was standing near the wall, studying the panel mounted on it, or maybe simply staring at the wall in boredom. Does he not see all that water? Or was the water a hallucination as well? Sonny gritted his teeth, then walked forward and approached the security checkpoint. Excuse me. The officer turned around and looked at him without any particular expression. Yes, the man was seemingly in his early 30s, with pale skin and dark, slicked-back hair. There was nothing particularly memorable about him, except for how still his face seemed to be. Sonny sighed, and then said awkwardly, the safety manual says to inform the nearest officer if I hear voices. Well, I do. Hear them. So, the impassive man suddenly became more lively. A strange gleam appeared in his eyes. Oh, what do you hear? Sonny rubbed his face. Singing. I hear beautiful singing. The officer stared at him for a few moments, then nodded. I see. In that case, please follow me to the upper deck. Sonny shifted his weight to take a step forward, but then lingered for a moment and leaned slightly to the side instead. Glancing behind the naval officer, he took a short glance at the man's shadow. The shadow appeared exactly how it was supposed to appear. It swayed slightly on the surface of the water, staring at Sonny as shadows often did. Nevertheless, he felt very disturbed, for some reason. His intuition was not exactly ringing an alarm, but it had become strangely alert. Sonny looked back to the officer. Why the upper deck? The man smiled. Please, follow me to the upper deck. Something is wrong. Sonny frowned, trying to understand what was making him uncomfortable. Was it the Navy officer's unblinking stare? Unblinking, yes. The man wearing the uniform of a junior officer had not blinked once since they started talking. Sonny stared at him for a few moments, and then took a tentative step back. I'd rather not. The polite smile slowly disappeared from the officer's pale face. His dark eyes turned a little hollow. Oh. As Sonny backed away under the man's glossy stare, his communicator suddenly vibrated and let out a sharp sound. The Navy officer did not seem to react to it at all. Sonny, on the other hand, recognized the sound immediately. Crap. In the next moment, the lights in the passageway blinked in a specific pattern and simultaneously went out, submerging it in utter darkness. The battleship vibrated intensely for a split second and then went still as its reactors were shut down. Absolute silence enveloped the mighty vessel. Condition Black had gone into effect. Chapter 836, Black Water. As the lights went out and the reactors of the colossal vessel grew quiet, Sonny froze. His shadow sense extended outward as he sensed other people doing the same. Condition Black meant that the fleet was on the cusp of dire danger. After the alert was issued, every member of the First Army aboard the 40 ships had to cease all activity. They weren't supposed to make any noises or movements. They were not even allowed to agitate their essence in any way. The problem was, the strange Navy officer was still mere meters away from Sonny. He too stood motionlessly in the darkness. His head was lowered, so Sonny could not see the man's face. He could only hear his breathing. It sounded wet. Don't do it, don't. Suddenly, the man's shoulders twitched. Frozen a few steps away, Sonny gritted his teeth. Curse it all. The officer swayed slightly and then took a step forward. The water covering the floor parted, allowing him to move without making any sound. The air grew colder. A resentful expression appeared on Sonny's face. Don't move. Don't make noise. Don't circulate essence. Don't summon memories. What was he supposed to do? Break the regulations of Condition Black and risk putting the fleet under threat, or remain still and allow the officer, or whatever it was pretending to be one, approach him? Sonny could not summon any weapons or use his stronger aspect abilities. Simply backing away was against the rules. Damnation. The man, meanwhile, took another step. Now, only a couple of meters separated them. Sonny tensed. To hell with this. The moment the bastard tried to make a sudden movement, he would learn not to mess with a master. High alert or not, Sonny was not going to let the creepy thing touch him. The singing voices suddenly grew louder. He even thought that he started to understand the meaning of some of the words of their beautiful song. The man took another step towards Sonny, and suddenly disappeared. For a few moments he was surrounded by nothing but darkness. Where? And then, the water quietly splashed right behind him. What? His shadows did not see anything. Before Sonny could turn around, something flew through the passageway and collided with an invisible object behind him, producing a blinding flash of light. He was thrown off his feet and landed on the wet floor in a roll. Almost at the same time, the rising voices abruptly disappeared, and the battleship trembled as its reactors came back online. The lamps in the corridor ignited, drowning it in light. Jumping back to his feet as the cruel sight was manifesting itself into reality in his hand, Sonny looked ahead and saw a familiar figure pressing something dark and slithering into the metal bulkhead. Master Knave had lost his midnight blue coat somewhere and was now wearing only his black wetsuit. There was a strange bone knife in his hand. Impaled on that knife was a... Before Sonny could make sense of what the creature looked like, it suddenly lost its shape and turned into a formless mass of black water, which then fell to the floor and formed a puddle. Knave's indigo eyes shone with dark light as he turned his head. "Master Sunless, are you all right?" Sonny cautiously nodded. What the hell was that thing?" The scion of the great clan knight opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the battleship around them shuddered, and a muffled thunder sounded somewhere in the distance. The main railgun was firing. Knave shook his head. "No time right now. Check on your cohort." With that, the handsome man seemed to disappear. A moment later, the lamps illuminating the passageway blinked and changed their color to ominous red. Condition red, all-out battle. Sonny flinched, and then hurriedly used his communicator to send his soldiers an order to gather near the Rhino. Before he joined them, however, he hesitated for a moment and then stepped through the shadows, appearing in a secluded spot of the upper deck. It took him a moment to comprehend what was going on. The night was suddenly obliterated by hundreds of bright flashes as hundreds of cannons roared, discharging an endless rain of steel and tungsten rounds into the ocean. A large section of it had changed color at some point, becoming absolutely black. Although the force of the wind had not increased, the black waves seemed taller and more violent than those rolling far away. They reached toward the ships like fingers of an unknown monster. In an especially blinding flash, the main cannon of the flagship of the naval convoy fired, causing countless tons of the black water to be displaced and rise high into the sky like a colossal pillar. A second later, the thunderous roar of its discharge reached Sonny and made him grimace. The scope of the heavy bombardment was truly mind-boggling. However, it did not seem to do much except for slowing down the churning black water a little. As Sonny watched, he noticed human figures diving into the waves from the tall decks of the ships. They were the cohorts of Awakened that the House of Night had stationed on the 40 ships. Although the flagship was situated at a considerable distance from where Sonny stood, he still noticed a lonely figure jumping into the ocean from its towering bow. For some reason, that diver in particular demanded attention. A moment before the figure hit the waves, it shimmered slightly. Then, something massive and ferocious dove under the water. A giant black fin cut the waves before disappearing into the depths. The Saint Guardian of the convoy had joined the battle. Sonny stood among the thunderous roars of the firing cannons and stared at the rolling black waves, awed and dismayed. Slowly, a grim expression appeared on his face. "There is no place for me in a battle like this. None at all." What could an ant like him do when it seemed like the heaven itself went to war against the ocean? His eyes gleamed in the darkness. Not yet, at least. With that thought, he swallowed the bitter feeling of powerlessness and disappeared into the shadows, leaving to join his soldiers. Tonight, all they could do was stick together and hope to live until the morning. Chapter 837, Naval Engagement. The vehicle stable of the battleship was quiet and tense. Hundreds of people were moving with somber haste as they secured various tools and pieces of machinery. Thankfully, most of the vehicles were safely fastened in their cradles. As Sonny stepped out of the shadows, he had to make way for a lumbering loader that thundered past, carrying a half-disassembled bulk of a massive engine. All around them, the colossal vessel was trembling as its cannons continued to fire without stop. Muffled sounds of heavy ordnance sliding into the feeding mechanisms spread through the deck, From time to time, an especially loud noise announced that a powerful torpedo or a salvo of ballistic missiles were launched from their nests. Sunny was not the only person who felt a grim sense of powerlessness as the titanic battle continued to unfold in this nameless patch of the deep, dark ocean. While the crews of the battleships and the awakened serving the House of Night were locked in a furious fight with whatever ancient horror it was that had attacked the convoy, the 100,000 soldiers of the First Army had nothing to do but wait and beg the dead gods for salvation. He was better off than most, at least. Sunny had left one of his shadows on the upper deck to observe the battle. Even though it could only see the turbulent surface of the seething water and not the true confrontation that was taking place deep beneath, there was some relief in knowing what was going on. The rest did not enjoy such a privilege. They could only infer what was happening beyond the metal confines of the vehicle stable by paying attention to the sounds and vibrations spreading through the ship. Occasionally, a loud and startling bang would roll through the massive compartment, indicating that something had collided against the hull of the vessel from the outside. Full of dark thoughts, Sunny walked toward the cradle holding the rhino. Many people threw furtive glances at the passing master, hoping to find comfort and reassurance in his authority. Noticing that, he made an effort to hide his unease and project an image of absolute confidence. It seemed to have worked, calming the people down a little. Poor, what can I do that they can't? Reaching the rhino, Sunny saw 4 awakened standing near it with reserved expressions on their faces. Dorn, Quentin, Kim, Luster. He frowned. Where are Belle and Samara? Quentin straightened a little when he saw his superior approaching. They are in the dream realm, Captain. We have already secured their bodies in the sleeping pods inside the rhino. Sunny sighed. Well, it was not outside the expectations. In fact, Sunny had lucked out, considering that only 2 of his subordinates had happened to be asleep when the battle started. At least everyone is alive. Sunny had almost expected to find Luster missing. The dolt was exactly the kind of guy to be lured to his death by a vision of young beauties singing sweet songs. He stared at the young man, who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, and then turned to the rhino. The armored APC was theoretically seaworthy, so it was going to be their last hope in case the battleship went down. Getting the massive machine out of the vehicle stable was a tall task, of course. In fact, Sunny doubted that it was possible at all. He glanced at the sealed blast doors of the giant compartment, then at the solid alloy bulkheads. Would he be able to tear through the hull of the ship, should the need arise? After thinking for a few moments, Sunny judged that he stood a good chance of breaching the heavy armor of the colossal vessel, provided that he used his most powerful memories and had enough time. However, there was a big difference between creating an opening that a person could squeeze through and one that a vehicle the size of the rhino could. Things would have been different if Nephis was here with her flames and the shadows resonating with each other and augmenting Sunny. He could have ripped through the thick armor plates with ease. Better yet, Changing Star could have simply melted a giant hole through the side of the battleship. But she wasn't here. There was also the mass of black water outside. Why was he even entertaining these thoughts? Sunny sighed and shook his head. Get comfortable. This will probably take a while. His soldiers obeyed, sitting down on crates or leaning against the side of the rhino. However, none of the 4 looked particularly at ease. Luster lingered for a moment and then asked in a cautious tone, Captain, sorry, but what exactly is going on? Sunny shrugged. Something big and scary is trying to take a bite out of the convoy. What else? Don't worry too much. House of Night probably has things under control. I personally saw their saint joining the battle. Despite the precarious situation, Luster's eyes suddenly gleamed with excitement. Really? Wow, I hope I can see a saint fight one day. Sunny's face turned bleak as he threw a dark glance at the young man. Be careful what you wish for, fool. If you are ever close enough to see saints fight, then something has definitely gone horribly wrong. Believe me, I should know. Luster opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment something collided against the hull of the ship again, making him flinch and lose his train of thought. Despite the fact that these loud bangs had been occasionally resounding across the vehicle stable for some time now, each was still extremely jarring. People trapped in the vast compartment could not treat them with indifference, no matter how much they might have wished to. Still, slowly but surely, they were growing accustomed to the startling noise of the collisions. This last one, though, Sonny scowled. The last one was different. He slowly turned around and stared at a certain spot on the opposite wall of the stable. Was Sonny imagining it, or did the bulkhead look a little deformed? Before he could finish the thought, something collided against the ship once again, and the alloy wall visibly bent inward. Chapter 838, Bang, Crap. As hundreds of petrified people watched in fear, one of the sections of the giant compartment's outer wall bent slightly. An ugly deformity appeared on it, and as the echo of the loud and jarring bang died down, they heard the sound of water rushing into the narrow gaps between the different layers of the battleship's armored hull. A dark expression appeared on Sonny's face. His fingers twitched, and then he turned his head slightly. "On your feet, soldiers." Dorn, Quentin, Kim, and Luster rose, ready for battle. However, there was a subtle sense of hesitation hiding behind their masks of professionalism and composure. As elites of the government forces, they knew how to fight against nightmare creatures, other awakened, and horrors of all kinds. But how were they supposed to fight the ocean? A moment later, something crashed into the side of the ship with a thunderous bang once again, making the indentation in the bulkhead of the vehicle stable grow more pronounced. People that were closest to it shuddered and backed away. Some turned around and ran. Soon, the space around the damaged section of the wall became completely empty. Everyone in the large compartment had moved as far away from it as they could, pressing against the opposite wall and staring at the massive deformity. A second passed in utter silence, then another, then one more. All that could be heard was the sound of rushing water. Someone cursed in a stifled bang. As several people yelped, the wall bent inward even more, its misshapen portion growing in size and reaching slightly deeper into the vehicle stable. A loud, deep groan of contorting metal rolled through the air, reverberating in their very bones. "Captain." Kim paled as she stared at the deformed bulkhead. Sonny felt her aspect ability brushing against his mind, and then his perception of the world changed. Everything was largely the same, but the damaged wall became tinted by several subdued colors. It was as if a mad painter had vandalized it with an unsteady brush. Most of the wall remained metal gray, but closer to the massive dent, the armored alloy turned anxious orange and pale red. A small patch of the red was vibrant and vivid. Instead, Sonny gritted his bang, bang, bang. 3 consecutive strikes crashed into the outer hull, exacerbating the damage and making the wall bend even more. People screamed and tried to get even further away from it, but there was simply nowhere for them to go. Some eyed the exit from the vehicle stable, while some stared at the contorted bulkhead, frozen still. Somehow it still held. The metal groaned once more, but endured. Nothing happened for a dozen seconds. Then, another blow crashed into the damaged section of the hull, and the wall bent a little more. As it did, a thin crack appeared right where the alloy had been painted vibrant red. A single drop of black water seeped through the crack and rolled down. Hundreds of people watched the drop with horror written on their faces. Before the next strike tore the hull open, however, a tide of shadows suddenly rose and rushed toward the deformed wall as a wave. Converging on the damaged section, the wave splattered across its surface and then somehow solidified, turning into an improvised brace. Sonny grunted, feeling the strain of keeping such a heavy mass of shadows tangible. It was well within his limit, though if plugging the leak was the only thing he had to do. The problem was that the crushing blows against the dented bulkhead did not stop coming. One after another, they impacted against it, sending tremors running through the entire vehicle stable. Sonny had to keep exerting opposite pressure to keep the wall intact. It was as if he was trying to brace a castle gate as a heavy ram was pounding on it from the other side. Keeping shadows tangible was hard, but forcing them to continuously press forward with that much force was even harder. Clenching his fists, Sonny looked at his subordinates and said in a strained voice, "Dorn, help me push the brace against the bulkhead. Quentin, try to use your aspect to repair the cracks. Luster, keep Dorn and Quentin supplied with essence. Transfer your own to them if one or both come close to running out." Then, he turned to the rest of the humans gathered in the vehicle stable and barked, What are you staring at? Make yourself useful, fools. Those of you who are awakened with useful aspects, help if you can. Those of you who are mundane, there are literally tons of equipment and handy machinery in this damned compartment. Even a complete idiot can find a way to reinforce the hull with all that gear, so get to work. The people stared at him for a split second. Then Dorn and Quentin dashed toward the shadow brace. This prompted the others to start moving as well. Another bang rolled through the spacious compartment, but no one paid it any attention. Now that Sonny broke the veil of fear that had paralyzed the members of the First Army, everyone got busy making sure that the bulkheads held. With the mass of shadows reinforcing the most damaged section, it was not too hard for them to make sure that several smaller dents that soon appeared elsewhere never broke. The immediate crisis passed. The people in the vehicle stable survived. Now, all that remained was to wait and see if they would be able to continue staying alive in the coming hours. They did. After what felt like an eternity of intense and terrifying struggle, the battle outside finally started showing signs of slowing down. Sonny, who was slowly growing concerned about his reserves of essence, let out a sigh of relief. Through his shadow on the upper deck, he could see that the fleet had escaped from the vast blotch of black water that marred the surface of the ocean. The cannons were slowly ceasing their bombardment, and the crews of the battleships had already started evaluating the damage. A giant shape rose from the depths and broke the surface of the water as it jumped into the air. Sonny saw a glimpse of a creature that resembled a monstrous killer whale, with its black and white hide torn and showing many signs of an intense confrontation against an unknown and ferocious enemy. Then, it shimmered and turned into a tiny silhouette of a human who then tiredly climbed onto the deck of the flagship and disappeared. More human figures emerged from the water and returned aboard the ships of the convoy. Master Knave was among them. The handsome man climbed onto the deck not too far away from where Sonny's shadow was hiding and sat down with an exhausted expression. Drops of water were falling from his black hair. His wetsuit appeared more ragged than it had been when they first met, but the scion of the House of Night did not seem to bear any serious wounds. Soon his indigo eyes shined as they reflected the first rays of sunshine that broke through the eastern horizon. A new day had come. The fearsome battle was over. Chapter 839. Unholy Blood. In the end, none of the 40 colossal ships had been lost. Some received moderate damage to their hulls, but the high compartmentalization and the rugged engineering of the war vessels prevented them from going down. As the fleet escaped the vast blot of black water, it continued moving south without ever slowing down. In fact, the reactors were sent into a controlled overload to enhance the speed of the convoy even further and quickly increase the distance between it and the latent danger. As the battered ships cut the waves, thousands of crewmates were assigned to repair brigades that started patching up the torn sections of the hulls. None of them paid any attention to the fact that the fleet was still in transit, hinting that this precarious type of work was not new to them. The rows of cannons were checked and reloaded. New missiles and torpedoes were slotted into the empty nests. The wounded were moved to infirmaries, and the dead were given burials at sea. Despite the frightening scope of the battle, not too many humans had lost their lives. Things could have been different if the Awakened of the House of Night had not acted so swiftly. A few days later, Sonny was resting in the officer's lounge of the scarred battleship as he chatted with Master Knave. Since there were no other Ascended stationed on the vessel, the two sometimes kept each other company. So anyway, the giant just whacked the creepy skull with his hammer. Boom! Let me tell you, at that moment I was glad that my pants were already wet. I don't know if that thing died or not, but it did not bother us after that. The scion of the great clan looked at him with an amused expression. The dark sea of the forgotten shore has to be a great titan then, at least. Sonny shrugged. That is what I think as well. But who can say for sure? That whole place is weird. He hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Do you think that it is connected to the black water? What is that thing anyway?" Knive's expression dimmed a little. Well, no one really knows. We have stumbled on the black water many times, both in the real world and in the dream realm. It is one of the more prominent hazards in the storm sea. Some think that it is a type of nightmare creature. Some think that it is a powerful terror that had been torn into numerous pieces thousands of years ago. Some even think that is the blood of an ancient, long-dead titan. He shook his head and sighed. In any case, everyone agrees that it is best to avoid it. The black water is not really sentient, so hiding from it is not too hard. It's just that this convoy is too damn large. There are too many souls, too many awakened. Their scent attracted it, as well as all the abominations that dwell within it. Luckily, most of them were not too powerful this time. The handsome master thought for a bit. I don't think that the black water is the same as the dark sea of the Forgotten Shore, though. They seem similar on the surface, but that sea of yours is much more vast and powerful. It is a miracle that you and your friends managed to seal it, as mere sleepers. Sunny glanced at Knave with a somber expression. It was not a miracle. Countless thousands of young men and women had died on the Forgotten Shore across 2 decades to uncover the secrets that eventually allowed us to seal the Dark Sea. Many of them would have been pillars of humanity by now, if they had survived. We just finished what they had started. The First Lord and his cohort, the members of the Dream Army, even Gunlaug and his lieutenants. If not for their contributions, Nephis and Sunny would have never been able to lay siege to the Crimson Spire and conquer it. The scion of the House of Night sighed. Most problems can be solved if you throw enough bodies at them. Hopefully the Antarctica campaign will be different. It had to be, considering that no amount of bodies would be enough to bury a problem of that magnitude. Sunny grimaced. How long before we reach it anyway? Knave shifted slightly and smiled. Conditions are good. If all goes well, a week at most. Then, he leaned forward and added, "Oh, by the way, I just received the news. The government is going to be announcing the voluntary mobilization in the next couple of days. The second evacuation army will already be starting to form by the time you guys make landfall." Sunny gave him a dubious look. That's great. I doubt that it will arrive to reinforce us anytime soon, though. Things like that take a lot of time, not to mention that the best and the brightest that the government has to offer are already aboard these ships. With the legacy clans remaining on the sidelines, the reinforcements are not going to change much. The Nightwalker shrugged. I wouldn't be so sure that the legacy clans won't join in the fun. Sunny frowned. I've been told that neither Song nor Valor are interested in participating in the campaign. And while you guys are helping out, the House of Night is not going to send its land troops either. Knave lingered for a moment. My clan is most useful at sea. As for the other two, indeed they have only sent token forces to the First Army. They are acting reluctant for now. He shook his head. However, don't let their act fool you. The legacies are definitely going to join the fight. They might not come in the first wave, or even the second, but they will come. Sunny looked at him, unconvinced. What makes you say that? The handsome master simply smiled. Have you ever met a legacy that could resist joining a glorious fight? He leaned back and let out a laugh, especially when there are countless treasures, advancements, and spoils of all kinds to be made in the fight. Sunny's expression darkened. Legacies were known to pursue power and opportunity, indeed. If the 2 remaining great clans did really join the Antarctica campaign, the army would be relieved of a large part of its burden. However, with what he knew about the conflict between Song and Valor, would they be joining the struggle against the Chain of Nightmares to help humanity? Or would they be joining it simply because Antarctica could become the most convenient battlefield for their own private war? Chapter 840, Mobilization. As the naval convoy moved closer and closer to Antarctica, Sunny had to accelerate his attempts to weave new and better enchantments into the memories of his soldiers. Although his rudimentary knowledge of sorcery was not nearly enough to create something truly powerful, he did manage to comprehensively upgrade the cohort's arsenal. Even if the modifications he had made were mostly modest, they were all targeted and suited the tasks facing the first irregular company. While Sunny failed to make the memories considerably stronger, he succeeded in tailoring them to the situation and, more importantly, to their users. This was already enough. Now, many of the memories that his subordinates wielded looked rather peculiar to his eyes. If he were to touch them and peer deep inside, he would see strange weaves that combined the usual strings of ethereal light with the lightless threads made of shadow essence. The sight reminded Sunny of himself and Nephis. And speaking of changing star, a few days before the fleet reached Antarctica, the world was shaken by an emergency announcement transmitted by the government. Of course, the propaganda machine managed to present the approaching cataclysm in an easily digestible and inspiring light. It was almost as if the chain of nightmares was going to be a glorious stage for heroism, valiance, and human triumph, instead of a bloody, unmitigated disaster. However, no matter how hard the government tried, people weren't that easy to fool. Although nothing much changed for the soldiers of the First Evacuation Army, Sonny was sure that a wave of panic was spreading through the rest of the world. The population centers of the southern quadrant were, of course, hit the worst. He could not even imagine what the people living there were going through, but other continents had to be consumed by fear as well. If something like that could happen in Antarctica, then it could happen anywhere else. The infrastructure was bound to come under terrible strain when hundreds of millions of refugees from the besieged continent arrived, if they could even be saved. What if the evacuation failed? How did people living in South America feel, knowing that they would soon be cut off from the rest of humanity? No one was left unaffected by the shocking news. Nephis and the rest of the cohort had to have seen the announcement as well. Knowing that the next few weeks were going to be extremely turbulent, Sonny retreated into his cabin, spent some time establishing a new tether, and then closed his eyes. It took him several minutes of intense concentration to grasp the elusive sensation of the dream realm anchor. Then, he circulated his essence in a swift, complicated pattern and disappeared. The cabin was suddenly silent and empty. All that remained was a slight, eerie feeling of coldness that permeated the air. The ivory tower did not change much in the many months since Sonny last visited his current citadel, at least on the outside. Well, what did he expect? The Great Pagoda remained the same for thousands of years, so why would it suddenly change now? The firekeepers might have made it their home, but they were hardly capable of reshaping the ancient structure. The island itself, however, looked a bit different. To his surprise, Sonny noticed a large garden surrounded by a neat and tidy wooden fence. Inside, various vegetables were growing in the soil. There were also several other structures here and there, all built of wood. Some seemed like they were meant for training. Some resembled simple barns. They all looked rather harmonious. That's probably Car's and Shakti's handiwork. The two members of Cassie's former cohort had used to be artisans in the Bright Castle. One was an awakened carpenter, the other Keto's disciple with an aspect related to plants. The Ivory Island looked much more inhabited now. More than that, a familiar ship rested on the surface of the lake. Despite thousands of years that had passed since its former captain disappeared, the flying vessel remained much the same. Sonny sighed. He had been rather taken by the Rhino. But now, looking at the graceful lines of the ancient ship's hull, he couldn't help but feel that the armored APC was rather small and shabby. Whatever, it has better plumbing anyway. That's what really matters. Somewhat vindicated, Sonny allowed himself to enjoy the peace and tranquility of the beautiful island for a few moments, and then headed toward the tower. As he did, a thundering voice boomed behind him. "Sonny!" He slowed down, and then cautiously turned around. Effie was traversing the green meadow with long strides. Her eyes were burning with intense emotion. Uh-oh. A second before the huntress reached him, a swift shadow flew across the grass, and Kai suddenly landed on the ground. The archer seemed concerned. "Sonny," Effie growled, interrupting him. "What the hell, Sonny? Antarctica. That was your big secret. You up and left to go to war without telling us?" Sonny stared at them for a few moments, and then cleared his throat. "Actually, it's Captain Sunless to you, citizens. Please maintain some decorum." Effie's eye twitched before the huntress did something that one or both of them would regret. Sonny raised his arms. All right. Yeah, I'm currently in the southern quadrant. It wasn't my secret to tell. Okay, the government is very particular about classified information, you know." He lingered for a moment, and then added, "Besides, it's not like you can't join me. The Second Army would be very glad to get its hands on two renowned masters. The life of service is not for the faint of heart, of course, but the benefits are to die for." The huntress stared at him in stunned silence. Finally, she palmed her face and said, "Doofus, no, sorry, Captain Doofus, are you really giving us the recruitment speech?" Sonny looked her up and down and grinned. "Well, not really. However, I do think that the uniform will suit you very much. Chapter 841. Prudent Decision. For a few moments, there was an awkward silence between the three of them. Eventually, Sunny sighed. Listen, it is what it is. I have my own reasons to join the campaign in the Southern Quadrant. Both of you are smart enough to realize that the picture painted by the government is far removed from the truth. The truth, the truth is that Antarctica is going to be a disaster, and no one, not even masters like us, can guarantee their survival. So you have to decide for yourself. He looked at Effie and Kai with a heavy expression and added, if you decide to join the Second Army, do it for a good reason. Do it for yourself, your desires, your principles. Point is, whatever you do, definitely don't do it for me. Chances are that we won't meet even if you ship to Antarctica. It's a big place, you know? His friends stared at him with unreadable expressions. A few moments later, Kai shook his head with a subtle smile. Thank you very much for caring, Sonny. But you don't have to remind us, really. We both have good heads on our shoulders. We are more than qualified to make prudent decisions. Effie nodded. Exactly. If anyone should be giving sage advice here, it's us. We're older than you, and also it's pointless anyway, because we have already enlisted. Sonny blinked. You what? The huntress grinned and patted him on the shoulder. What? Did you think that we would miss our chance to fight an apocalyptic horde of nightmare creatures? Dream on, buddy. Both Kai and I were among the first ones to submit our applications to the recruitment bureau. He stared at her for a second, then rubbed his temples. Wait, you did? Why? Effie and Kai glanced at each other and shrugged. The archer was the first one to respond, because there are hundreds of millions of people that need help. Is this not reason enough? The huntress shook her head. Because I am a warrior. When an enemy invades your home, you don't hide. You go to war and kick the enemy's butt. We humans need to protect what's ours. If we can't even do that much, then we won't be humans for much longer. We'll just be food. Sonny studied their faces, then scratched the back of his head. Well, all right. I guess that makes sense. Welcome aboard, then. With your power and abilities, the Second Army is probably salivating over your applications right now. Chances are, you guys are going to outrank me very soon. Prudent decisions, huh? Doubtful. As they walked toward the ivory tower, he shared some details about the operation with them, including the disposition of human forces, the intended phases of the campaign, and his own role as a captain of the first irregular company. As he did, both Effie and Kai grew a little pensive. Yeah, I am not sure that the government can actually pull it off. Even if we maintain control over the evacuation centers, repelling the siege of the nightmare creatures for months won't be easy. It would be a miracle if we hold out for a year. But can the fleets even evacuate everyone in a year? Sonny hesitated for a moment, then tentatively nodded. That is the plan. The ships, they are massive. The naval convoy I'm currently at is carrying 100,000 soldiers, but that is only because most of the space is taken by the war machines, supplies, and all the logistical stuff needed to support a massive army. On its way back, the same convoy can carry millions upon millions of refugees. There are more convoys than that one, too. So, a year is not an unrealistic goal. Actually, it's more than most projections suggest. His face grew darker. However, that is only if the convoys don't meet obstacles of their own. So, who can say? I doubt that these projections will survive colliding against reality. Kai sighed. It seems that the Second Army won't be ready to deploy anytime soon. By the time we arrive in Antarctica, the situation might be entirely out of control. Many things can go wrong in a few months. Sonny shared the same sentiment. For what it's worth, I don't expect the worst to happen before you guys have the chance to experience it personally. The chain of nightmares is going to be ramping up as time goes on as well. So, you'll have plenty of opportunities to live through the truly terrible parts. They entered the ivory tower where Hope had once been imprisoned. As always, Sonny felt a subtle shiver run through his body and soul when he saw the great hall where he had faced the ineffable Damon. Now, Hope's former prison cell served as the heart of the human citadel. The 7 broken chains lay on the ground, forming the wide borders of the circle that served as the gateway. Myriads of runes glowed softly on their surface. The firekeepers made their home on the upper levels of the great pagoda, so the first level was mostly empty. Only a couple of them were here, busy with chores. Noticing Sunny, they greeted him with excited smiles. Weirdos. Sunny waved at them, then turned to Effie and Kai. By the way, where's Nephis? Has she arrived? Getting Changing Star to the Ivory Tower was a complicated process. She had to travel to the sanctuary of Noctis first, which demanded cooperation from the saint that had replaced Skytide as the person in charge of the Chained Isles. After that, the Firekeepers had to fly their ship all the way from the Ebony Tower to the surface, pick her up, and return into the depths of the sky below. However, it had not escaped his notice that the flying ship had somehow ended up on the Ivory Island itself. Had the Firekeepers found a way to brave the crushing? Kai nodded. She reached the tower a couple of days ago. It didn't take as long as we thought. With Noctis's help, Cassie had studied the flying ship extensively in the nightmare. I don't know how exactly, but she managed to repair its enchantment circuits enough to move directly between here and the Isles. The process is a bit precarious, but the travel time between here and the sanctuary was cut by several weeks. Sunny lingered for a moment, and then sighed. Well, where can I find her? Effie gave him a long look and gestured back to the gates that they had walked through. She's there, by the lake. Do you want to say hi? Sunny took a deep breath. Yeah, something like that. Chapter 842, Lessons of the Past. Leaving the Great Pagoda, Sunny glanced warily at the bones of Severax, the ivory dragon, whom Kai had slain in the nightmare, and slowly headed for the lake. Its surface was calm and clear, as always. Sunlight reflected from the tranquil waters, making it seem like a pool of shimmering silver. Despite the beauty of the heavenly lake, Sunny couldn't help but feel a hint of unease as he approached it. The memory of the furious naval battle was still fresh in his mind, so no body of water felt safe. On the shore, an intricate bench cut from white stone stood, inviting people to rest and enjoy the idyllic view. Currently, it was occupied by a familiar figure. Nephis sat with her legs crossed, staring at the sparkling water with a distant look. When Sunny's shadow fell on her, she lingered for a moment and then looked up. Sunny. He remained silent for a while, then sat on the bench and studied the beautiful lake as well. How's life treating you? Being adopted into a great clan has to be a weird experience. Nephis frowned. It's fine. Feels a bit strange to be addressed as sister by Morgan of Valor, I guess. She seems to enjoy my discomfort. Considering who Morgan's other sibling was, she probably put a different meaning into the word sister, one that entirely lacked affection, most likely. For a moment, Sunny was darkly amused. Never thought I would pity the Princess of War one day, but having both Mordret and Nephis as siblings, damn, her luck must be even worse than mine, if that's even possible. Changing Star let out a heavy sigh and turned slightly to face him. You should have told me, Sunny. He smiled. What? About Antarctica? Oh, that was classified information. I thought that Cassie would have informed you anyway. She had to have known, right? She studied him for a few moments, then shook her head. If she did, she kept the knowledge to herself. Cassie has changed a lot since the Forgotten Shore. She carries a lot of secrets. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Huh. I guess there's trouble in paradise. I was under the impression that she's utterly loyal to you like a lost puppy, you know. It's surprising to hear. Changing Star did not respond immediately. After a while, she said, Cassie has her own thoughts and her own desires. She is powerful too, no less than the rest of us. Brushing her agency aside would be a mistake. Sunny laughed. Of all the people in the world, I would be the last one to underestimate Cassie, don't you think? Nephis simply looked at the lake. Are you safe? He lingered for a bit, then shrugged. Is anyone safe? I am surrounded by thousands of soldiers, awakened masters, and even a few saints. Plus, I'm me. Antarctica is no worse than the Forgotten Shore or the Kingdom of Hope. In fact, if anyone is in danger, it's you. Are you safe? Her face grew dark. Nephis gritted her teeth for a moment, and then said with unusual intensity, You don't understand, do you? This is not the first expedition of that kind. Humanity has tried to resist the spell before. The last attempt, the last one, took the lives of both my grandfather and my mother. They were powerful too. They were exceptional and ahead of their time too. What makes you think that you'll do better than them? Sunny shook his head. Many things have changed in the past 2 decades. Back then, humanity had much less awakened. There were barely any masters around. No saint had even emerged yet, at least officially. Our tech, spell tech, and strategies were much more primitive. We had no experience dealing with something like that. Yes, North America was a disaster, but we learned our lesson there. This campaign, it will be different. It will be better. I will survive it and grow stronger as a result. Nephis looked at him with a challenge. Says who? He smiled. I do. I say if I die or not. It all depends on me, does it not? Sunny sighed and glanced at the radiant lake. The nightmare creatures don't scare me. The chain of nightmares doesn't scare me either. If there's one thing that does, however, it's the great clans and their ambitions. Will they really come to Antarctica to start a war of their own? A troubled expression appeared on Changing Star's face. She hesitated before giving him an answer. I don't know. Maybe. It is a perfect opportunity. His own face grew ugly. Why? Why are they doing it now? This is insanity. Our civilization is already on its last leg. Nephis lingered for a while, then sighed. There has to be a logic to their actions, but what is it? I'm not sure. All of it is very strange. We are missing something, I think. A key piece of information that can explain everything. The sovereigns, they never do anything without a reason. Sunny scoffed. Is there something you are sure of? She looked at him and said in a serious tone, There is one thing. Changing Star remained silent for a moment, distant flames dancing in her cold gray eyes. When the great clans do come to Antarctica, all of us better be ready. Several days later, Sunny ascended to the upper deck of the colossal battleship and walked over to its bow. The guards stationed here and there on the deck let him pass freely, both because of the 3 stars on the shoulder insignia of his black bodysuit and his close relationship with Knave of House Knight, their direct superior. Stopping in the shadow of a massive cannon turret, Sunny endured the cold winds that pelted him with drops of icy water and looked ahead. In front of him were the towering hulls of other metal leviathans of the naval convoy, which cut the waves as they sailed toward a distant horizon. And out there on the horizon, a dark line slowly appeared, finally putting an end to the vast expanse of undulating water. Antarctica. After several tumultuous weeks at sea, the fleet had reached its destination. Chapter 843, Falcon Scott. Perched precariously on a broken mountain road, the Rhino stood still as the members of the cohort cautiously climbed higher. Bell, Dorn, and Luster were hiding 100 steps ahead, just below the crest of the tall hill, while Sunny and Kim were currently on the roof of the armored vehicle. I see them. Samara was tensely studying the screen of her military communicator, which was receiving the video feed from a compact spy drone that she had sent ahead. On it was a small valley. The image was grainy and noisy, sometimes breaking out entirely because of the interference of the nightmare gate exerted on it. Flooding the valley, a swarm of nightmare creatures could be seen. There are hundreds of them. Most are awakened, but there are several fallen abominations as well. The gate guardian has already emerged. It seems to be a devil. Sunny nodded. Correct. There are 274 abominations, of them 242 are awakened, while 32 are fallen. The guardian is indeed a fallen devil. One of his shadows had snuck much closer to the swarm of nightmare creatures. It wasn't suffering from any interference either. Sunny, however, maintaining a calm facade, he shivered inwardly. The gate was whispering into his ears, calling to him on a level much deeper than thought or emotion. He had experienced the call before, but now that he was a master, it became so much stronger and harder to resist. Sunny had experienced this change almost instantly after the first evacuation army made landfall in Antarctica. While the other 3 convoys were sent to East Antarctica, the largest and most populated region of the southern quadrant, the one he had traveled with was meant to deliver troops to the Antarctic Center. The Antarctic Center was a long, narrow, mountainous landmass that served as the administrative and industrial center of the continent. As such, it harbored many priority targets that had to be evacuated at all costs. The first several days after the arrival of the army was pure chaos. The large city they entered, Falcon Scott, was in a state of utter havoc. Millions of people had just learned that their entire lives would be uprooted or maybe even lost, while the local government forces had done their best to maintain order and prepare the civilians for evacuation. That did not amount to much in the end. The situation had been only made worse by all the gates that were opening near and within the city. As one of the Southern Quadrant Awakened had put it, it used to be that one gate opened every few weeks. Then, it was one every week. Then, several a week. Then, one every day. By the time the evacuation army arrived, the situation was swiftly growing even worse. With so many gates around, every awakened master and saint felt their call, some more than others. It wasn't easy for Sunny to adjust to this new, subtly maddening reality. He wouldn't be surprised if the prolonged exposure to the call drove many people insane. But they had not reached that point yet, even if the world seemed to have lost its mind. After spending several days in the panicked chaos consuming Falcon Scott, a large chunk of the Army Corps stayed behind to start converting it into an impregnable fortress. The northernmost city of the Antarctic Center was going to serve as its largest evacuation center, so it had to be converted into a full-fledged siege capital in the coming months. Most of the government forces, however, moved out and started their long march south. Their job was to reach other population centers, establish safe evacuation corridors, and start moving civilians through them to the handful of siege capitals. The 1st Irregular Company left with the field army and split up to assist its various divisions. And now, just a day later, Sunny's cohort was going to fight its first battle. The division they were escorting was already engaged in a low-intensity confrontation against a mass of nightmare creatures that had emerged from half a dozen gates at the lower altitudes. To wipe the abominations faster, they needed to flank them, but the most suitable road skirted the mountain slopes and was itself blocked by the 7th gate. Deploying soldiers to fight on such rough terrain was problematic, so the irregulars were sent instead. Standing on the roof of the Rhino, Sunny sighed. "We are in luck." Both Samara and Kim turned and stared at him with inscrutable expressions. After a few moments of dead silence, the latter said in a timid voice, "I am sorry, sir, but how can facing 300 nightmare creatures and a fallen devil be called luck?" He shrugged. "That is what I call a low-threat gate. Do you have a guess why?" Samara frowned. "Because there's no tyrant?" Sunny nodded with a smile. "Indeed. Sure, there are a lot of abominations, but without a tyrant or a terror to control them, they're just a herd. Things would have been much, much worse if all these creatures could coordinate their attack. Plus, we're smarter. That means that we can stack the odds in our favor." She lingered for a moment. "I think the odds are already in our favor. We have higher ground, and the wind is blowing in the right direction. The nightmare creatures have not caught our scent yet, which means that the element of surprise is on our side." Sunny shook his head. "Don't be fooled. They already know that we're here. Abominations have other ways of sensing human flesh and souls. In fact, they would not have stayed put near the gate unless they were up to something in the first place. They would have spread around and tried to find something to tear apart and devour." Kim shivered. "Then what are they waiting for?" He glanced at her with an amused expression. "Isn't it obvious? They're waiting for us to walk into the trap. That fallen devil is much smarter than it looks." Sunny's expression hardened. "Which is why it has to die first." Samara studied the screen of her communicator for a few moments and sighed. "I can probably make the shot from this distance, but we don't have a direct line of fire. The crest of the hill that hides us from sight also protects the enemy from ranged attacks." Sunny's smile turned into a dark grin. "That is true as far as your rifle goes." A swarm of scarlet sparks shimmered into existence around his hand, and then a black bow appeared in it, radiating a feeling of devastating strength. Its string was bright red, and there was a small brand of the same color on one of its limbs, in the shape of an anvil pierced by a straight sword. But arrows, unlike bullets, do not have to fly in a straight line. Chapter 844, Opening Act. Sunny studied the swarm of abominations that flooded the small valley. These ones didn't seem as dangerous as the primal hunters he had once fought in front of Rain's school. The creatures had bestial bodies, with 4 bony limbs that ended in sharp claws and long, slithering tails. Ridges of jagged spikes rose from their spines, and their maws were full of sharp fangs. Most disturbingly, all except for the fallen ones seemed to have had their eyes violently torn out. Now, only darkness nestled in the empty, gaping holes of their eye sockets. The abominations did not move as if they were blind, though there was a strange predatory precision to their subdued motions. The devil was different from the eyeless beasts, though. It resembled them outwardly, but possessed a more humanoid body. The creature stood on its hind legs, while his front limbs resembled human hands. Its eyes were closed and even seemed sewn shut. Something constantly moved behind the eyelids, giving Sunny the creeps. The powerful abomination towered above its ilk, reaching almost 3 meters in height. 274 nightmare creatures was a lot. Most cohorts of Awakened would not have even considered attacking that many abominations, and quietly retreated instead. I need to be careful about this. Sunny thought for a few long moments, and then spoke. Samara, move forward and assume a position higher up the slope, where you'll be able to shoot over the crest of the road, Vanguard. Prepare to advance and secure the crest. Kimmy, work your magic. His words reached the melee fighters of the cohort without any problem. Of course, he could have used the usual technological solutions to ensure good communication, but with how unstable tech was near Nightmare Gates, it was always good to have a backup. For that reason, Luster was currently in possession of an extremely ordinary, very unassuming rock, which nevertheless was somehow able to speak with their captain's voice. One of Sunny's shadows was following the vanguard as well, so he had no trouble hearing their responses. As the cohort's ranged specialist hoisted the heavy rifle on her shoulder and jumped down off the rhino, the melee vanguard crept forward. Quentin served as the center of the formation, with Bell and Dorn flanking him. Luster stayed behind, to cover their backs and prevent any monsters from escaping toward the rhino. He was confidently wielding a beautifully etched halberd in his hands, which both gave him some range and allowed the young man to support the 3 fighters from the back, should the need arise. Its versatility also gave him a lot of options on how to engage the enemy. During the past weeks, Sunny had done all he could to raise the battle effectiveness of the cohort and enhance the memories of his soldiers. The weapons received most of his attention, but he also augmented their armors by transplanting the tenacious enchantment of the Patient Avenger into their weaves. With its help, the survivability of the cohort had reached a new level. The Patient Avenger itself had been entrusted to Quentin. Sunny also transferred the Blood Blossom to Bell with much reluctance, of course. With his current strength, the augmentation granted by the Morbid Charm could not benefit him in any substantial way. It was a different story for the awakened swordsman, however, so the decision sadly made too much sense. Each member of the cohort was additionally protected by a charm that gave them slight resistance to cold, which is why they were able to all but ignore the slowly falling snow and the chilling wind that blew through the mountains. Standing near Sunny on the roof of the rhino, Kim, who was wielding a round buckler, a sharp rapier, and had a snub-nosed automatic carbine slung around her back, concentrated and unleashed her ability. First, she borrowed Sunny's sight. This also allowed her to see what his shadows saw, even though receiving so many different perspectives put an immense strain on her mind. Then, she used her dormant ability to concentrate on the fallen devil and find its weaknesses. Finally, she shared her own perception back to Sunny, allowing him to see where to strike as well. The shadows did not see color, so to him, the body of the towering abomination became painted in different shades of gray. The lighter areas were the most resilient, while those that were darker were less protected. Strangely enough, a small spot at the very center of the devil's forehead was almost entirely black. That was where Sunny aimed, as he wrapped 2 shadows around his body and strained his muscles. The black bow bent, despite possessing an enchantment called Unbending. Because of it, Morgan's warbow required a giant strength to draw, but was also capable of sending arrows very far and translated devastating force to them. Luckily, Sunny was incredibly strong, even for a master. A ghostly shade appeared on the string of the bow and then turned into a black arrow with dark fletching and a narrow arrowhead that seemed to have been crafted from a long, sharp piece of obsidian. The shadow arrows were swift, flew without producing any sound, and had an unnatural ability to find cracks in the enemy's armor. Sunny closed his eyes and moved the bow higher, aiming at an abomination that was more than a kilometer away and was only seen by his shadow was not an easy task. But he had not trained with Kai for nothing. He held his breath, and then corrected his aim by a couple millimeters when the wind suddenly picked up. Lastly, Sunny poured his essence into the bow, instantly emptying one of his 4 cores. The Death Dealer enchantment was a gluttonous one, as far as essence was concerned. But it was worth it. A moment later, Sunny relaxed his fingers, allowing the string to slide off them on its own. The black arrow noiselessly disappeared into the sky, so fast that it was hard to see it at all. It arched above the crest of the road, soared high, and then fell down. The fallen devil might have still dodged if it knew what was coming, but the shadow arrow was so swift and silent that the abomination never stood a chance. A black streak flashed in the air, piercing the center of the gate guardian's forehead with stunning ease and exiting from the back of its head a split second later. The devil's eyes suddenly opened, revealing. Sunny never learned what had been hiding behind the creature's eyelids, because a moment after his shadow arrow disappeared into the ground, the creature's entire skull suddenly deformed and violently exploded. Every bone in its upper body was shattered by the residual force of the impact. The misshapen, headless corpse was thrown back with so much momentum that it killed several nightmare creatures that just happened to stand in the way. Just like that, the fallen devil who guarded the nightmare gate was gone. All members of his cohort froze for a moment, astonished by the ghastly sight. The nightmare creatures seemed to have been stunned by the sudden and gruesome death of their leader as well. Standing on top of the rhino, Sunny lowered his bow and smiled with vicious glee. Well, not a bad start. A second later, the small valley exploded with movements as hundreds of abominations lunged in the direction from which the black arrow had arrived. Chapter 845, Ranged Specialists. You have slain a fallen devil, defiled witness. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory. A swarm of fearsome nightmare creatures flowed up the slope of the small mountain valley, rushing toward the crest of the road where a handful of awakened warriors were preparing to make their stand. The eyeless abominations were moving with ferocious determination, covering many meters with each stride as viscous saliva streamed from their terrifying maws. To their right was the slope of the mountain, while to their left was a canyon that grew deeper and deeper as the road climbed up. Standing at the top of the hill, Quentin, Bell, Dorn, and Luster studied the approaching avalanche of monsters with grim apprehension. Lowering the enchanted sledgehammer off his shoulder, the striker of the melee vanguard glanced at his comrades and spoke in a reserved tone. What do you think? Bell readied his sword and smiled. This is going to be fun. If we survive, I won't have to be embarrassed about sleeping through the last one anymore. Quentin silently shook his head, while Luster, who stood behind the 3, closed his eyes for a moment. Crazy bastard. The swordsman simply laughed. At that moment, they heard a subtle electric whine, and then a loud crack of a highly compressed sonic boom. A moment later, the head of a hulking abomination that towered above the rest of the swarm exploded into bloody chunks. The massive carcass toppled over like a marionette that had its strings cut, instantly turning into a lifeless heap of twitching meat. Standing on the roof of the rhino, Sunny drew his bow and let an arrow fly. Keep aiming for their foreheads, Samara. Take down as many fallen as you can before the enemy reaches the 200 meters mark. Then switch to explosive ammunition and concentrate on the front rows of the awakened abominations. We must break their momentum. Hidden between large rocks higher up the slope, the deadly sharpshooter recharged her coil gun as she poured a steady flow of essence into an armor-piercing tungsten slug. Understood. A heartbeat later, the rifle whined again, and another abomination fell to the ground. At the same time, a black arrow pierced the head of an especially frightening creature. This time the effect was not as drastic, but the eyeless horror was killed just the same. Drawing the unbending warbow once more, Sunny briefly frowned. Too slow. They had barely 24 seconds left before the swarm reached the melee vanguard. That was not nearly enough to kill all the remaining fallen abominations, and then there were the 240 awakened ones left as well. Sunny and Samara would just have to do their best. Standing by his side, Kim nervously grasped the grip of her carbine and checked its magazine, which was loaded with bullets that seemed to glow slightly in the dim twilight. Each had been charged by Samara prior to the battle. Sadly, the supply of these powerful rounds was limited. The bullets slowly lost their charge as time went by, so the cohort could not hoard them. Black arrows rained from the sky, reaping one life after another. Head after head exploded, turning the cracked asphalt on the mountain road slick with blood. A fearsome nightmare creature fell almost every second as the number of the fallen abominations slowly dwindled. At some point, Samara shifted her aim to the mass of the rabid, eyeless beasts. Her eyes shone with ethereal light as a different kind of bullet escaped from the thick barrel of the Gauss rifle with a thunderous roar. In the next moment, a powerful explosion tore through the front row of the rushing swarm. A dozen abominations were instantly ripped apart. Chunks of mangled flesh flew into the air in a cloud of bloody haze. Sharp shards of broken bones pelted the surrounding creatures like shrapnel, wounding and maiming them. Almost instantly after the disfigured corpses fell to the ground, the sound of another thunderous explosion rolled over the mountains, and then another. Two more bloody rifts appeared in the mass of the frenzied abominations. Now that Samara didn't have to aim, her rate of fire increased. However, so did her consumption of soul essence. That's enough. Conserve your essence and switch back to priority targets. Sunny felled another fallen creature and drew the black bow again. However, this time, a different arrow appeared on its string. Instead of wood and metal, it seemed to be made of pure lightning. Just a couple of seconds before the first nightmare creatures reached the crest of the hill, a furious bolt of lightning fell from above. Augmented by the Death Dealer enchantment and two of Sunny's shadows, the strike of thunder instantly turned the abomination it hit into a cloud of swiftly dissipating ash. Then, powerful currents of electricity arced to the nearest beasts, spreading through the swarm in a destructive chain reaction. Because the monsters were so close to each other, the lightning spread far and wide. It grew weaker with each jump, but still, the damage it dealt was devastating. Sunny failed to count how many abominations he had killed, but it had to be several dozens at least. Even more were burned and wounded to various degrees. But he wasn't done yet. A moment after the lightning chained through the swarm, the shadows cast by large rocks suddenly surged forward and shot into the air, turning into long, vicious spikes. The nightmare creatures that had tried to leave the road and climb higher were either pierced or blocked by them, turning the slope of the mountain into a macabre forest of impaled bodies. With the deadly spikes blocking the slope and the deep canyon on the other side, the swarm had no other choice than to attack along the narrow line of the road. Funneled that way, and with their momentum broken, the abominations that had jumped over the corpses of their slain kin failed to overwhelm the melee vanguard of the cohort in one fell swoop. As Quentin stepped forward and received the first attack on his shield, the true battle started. Chapter 846, Melee Vanguard. In early April, Antarctica was enveloped by eternal twilight. The sun seemed to have frozen in place as it plunged behind the horizon, painting a persistent line of vibrant scarlet in the cold purple sky. Stuck between night and day, the southern quadrant was slowly slipping into the embrace of pure darkness that would last for many months. The behavior of the moon was strange and erratic as well. It remained in the sky for several weeks, then disappeared without a trace for long stretches of time. The radiant tapestry of Aurora Australis sometimes appeared to keep it company. Sunny had heard that the southern lights were breathtakingly beautiful, but he was yet to witness them himself. In any case, he did not care about heavenly miracles right now. All he cared about was whether his soldiers would be able to see the enemy clearly. Even though the long night had not descended yet, it was already hard enough to discern important details in the dim twilight. For that reason, Kim was currently channeling his vision to the rest of the cohort. The difference it made could be easily seen. Unencumbered by the absence of bright light and without the need to rely on luminescent memories, the melee vanguard moved as confidently as they would have in the middle of the day. Quentin stepped forward and leaned into his shield, meeting the charging abomination without giving any ground. His sword flashed forward, dealing a deep wound to the beast. Already, the edges of the cut started to rot, and the damage was even worse inside, since the blade bit deep. The combat healer flung the convulsing body of the nightmare creature aside and slashed at another one without any hint of hesitation. To his right, Dorn brought his heavy sledgehammer down, turning the head of a snarling abomination into bloody pulp. To his left, Bel's sword shimmered through the air, decapitating another. The road was narrow enough to prevent the swarm from surrounding them, and the slope of the mountain had turned into a killing field because of the bloodthirsty shadow spikes. The enemy could not flank the vanguard, so all the abominations could do was charge forward and up, half a dozen at a time. As the pressure of the mass of nightmare creatures mounted, the three fighters turned into an impregnable bastion. Quentin drew most attention and withstood attack after attack, which granted Bel and Dorn a modicum of freedom. They used it well, visiting unabashed slaughter upon the tide of eyeless beasts. The swordsman danced between them, phasing through his enemies and slicing their bodies apart as if they were made from paper. Dorn fought in a more reserved fashion, but his devastating and inescapable attacks were even more fearsome. Luster thrust his halberd forward from time to time, finishing off wounded enemies or preventing them from breaking through the walls of steel created by Quentin, Bel, and Dorn. Streams of foul blood were soon running down the surface of the mountain road. However, not everything went well for the cohort. Despite the unshakable will, ferocity, and deadly skill of the melee vanguard, there were just too many nightmare creatures for them to fight. Each of the abominations was powerful and deadly as well. Already, a few heavy hits landed on Quentin's armor, sending a net of thin cracks running through the polished breastplate. The healer easily managed to restore its integrity. But how long would he be able to keep up this lethal dance? Bel and Dorn were better off than him, but not by much. For now, one managed to avoid being torn apart due to his elusive aspect, while the other used his strength and calculating mind to avoid danger. Worse still, there were also the fallen abominations to think about. Just then, the first of the lumbering monstrosities finally reached the crest of the hill, ruthlessly throwing several of the lesser creatures into the canyon to clear a path for itself. The fallen lunged forward, opening its maw to bite down on Quentin's shield, and maybe take the healer's entire arm off with it. Before it could, however, a black arrow silently slid into its throat. The abomination twitched and fell down, sliding forward on the asphalt as a river of blood poured out of its mouth. Sonny was already drawing his bow again. Higher up the slope, Samara was calmly sending slug after slug into the attacking swarm. Kim was standing still, concentrating on providing all 6 members of the cohort with a clear view of the battlefield, as well as letting them know where to strike to deal as much damage as possible. Hell, we might actually make it. Sonny had several trump cards saved up in case things went south, but he was reluctant to use them unless necessary. This clash was an important step for the cohort up until now. They had only trained together. Being christened by blood in an actual battle would not only show how capable his soldiers were, but also truly bring them together. Sadly, just as he thought that, the situation suddenly and dreadfully changed. As the whole swarm of the eyeless abominations got close to the crest of the hill, the creatures froze for a split second. And then, the long, jagged spikes growing from their spines suddenly grew hazy, producing a strange vibration that covered the surrounded area like a dome. Sonny heard a high-pitched ringing that burrowed into his ears like a hot needle, and then the entire world suddenly spun. Curses. He swayed, almost falling off the rhino's roof. Suddenly, Sonny couldn't tell where was up and where was down, where was left and where was right. Everything around him turned blurry, disorienting, and impossible to tell apart. Through the shadows, he felt Quentin missing a step and being thrown back by a charging abomination. Dorn swung his sledgehammer to cover the falling healer, but missed and was pulled off balance by the inertia of his mighty strike. Bel phased back and staggered, almost tumbling to the ground. Sonic attack? Sonny gritted his teeth and dove through the shadows, disappearing from sight and emerging between the fighters of the melee vanguard a moment later. A flute carved out of emerald bone appeared in his hands. Kicking a nearby beast hard enough to crush its ribs and send the revolting creature flying away, Sonny brought the flute to his lips and blew into it softly. A moment later, a cone of absolute silence enveloped the crest of the hill. Instantly, the world stopped spinning, and he could see clearly again. As Quentin, Dorn, and Bel picked themselves up and readied their weapons with a visible relief, Sonny smiled darkly and stared at the approaching monsters. The cruel sight was already weaving itself into existence, surrounded by swirling fog. Taking a step forward, Sunny gripped the shaft of the somber spear and grinned. Denied. Chapter 847, Slaughter. The swarm had lost its leader. The momentum of its charge had been crushed. The secret weapon of the eyeless abominations had been rendered useless, and most importantly of all, scores of them had already lost their lives. But the nightmare creatures still presented a mortal danger to the cohort. There were still enough of them to bury Sunny and his soldiers under a mountain of flesh, claws, and fangs. More than a dozen fallen abominations remained as well, rushing forward to devour the 7 humans. An ugly smile appeared on Sunny's face. "Come get us, then." As the blade of the cruel sight shone with incandescent light, he sliced through the body of a lunging beast and issued a quick command. "Vanguard, follow me." He put the shaft of the somber spear in the way of a snarling maw, shifted his weight to throw the enemy to the ground, and struck another abomination with the butt of his weapon. "Kim, move forward to the crest of the hill. Samara, get closer and keep pressuring the fallen." As he spun and unleashed a diagonal cut, beheading a disoriented monster, a new memory was already weaving itself into existence. A thin iron chain was soon wrapped around his neck. On it hung a small statuette in the form of a beautiful young woman that held a spear in one hand and a human heart in another. Blood was pouring from a gaping wound on her bared chest. The dying wish seemed to come alive as his essence flowed into it. Death wish, enchantment description. Those who witness the wielder of this memory are compelled, friends to be inspired, foes to seek the wielder out. The power of the memory grows the more enemies they give the gift of death, and can be consumed to heal the wielder's wounds. Death charge. 000 there Dane 0. 000 row 1000. Now that Sunny was at the front of the cohort's battle formation, both his soldiers and the nightmare creatures could see him clearly. Well, he wasn't sure if the eyeless abominations could see anything, but they definitely perceived him in some mysterious way. The effect of the transcendent charm could be felt instantly. Behind him, the 4 fighters of the melee vanguard were suddenly reinvigorated. Their movements grew faster, sharper, and more focused. The enemies, on the other hand, became even more frenzied. They lunged at Sunny like rabid beasts, consumed by blind hatred, hunger, and madness. With all this fury mostly concentrated on him and him alone, Quentin, Bell, Dorn, and Luster gained some space to breathe. Which was a good thing, but crap. This was the first time Sunny used this particular memory, and he was already starting to regret it a little. The pressure of the mad onslaught that the affected nightmare creatures unleashed upon him was no joke. Gritting his teeth, he spun and danced, slaughtering one abomination after another. Guided by him, the vanguard slowly pushed into the swarm, taking a few tentative steps forward. Sunny served as the tip of their formation, turning into a bloody hurricane of radiant silver and bleak steel. Despite his superior strength and speed, another fighter would have been quickly overpowered by the sheer mass and ferocity of the countless nightmare creatures, then brought down to the ground and either crushed or torn apart. Luckily, Sunny was just too slippery and elusive to be surrounded and piled upon. As 3 shadows wrapped themselves around his body, his agility and swiftness reached superhuman heights. More importantly, when even that wasn't enough, he easily stepped through the shadows to avoid being swarmed by the onslaught of frenzied beasts. Empowered by his incredibly high divine affinity, the undying chain effortlessly withstood stray blows that managed to get past his defenses from time to time. The cruel sight sang, harvesting life after life like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Behind him, the melee vanguard fought with murderous resolve and swiftly improving cohesion. Not only were they able to provide Sunny with much-needed support and block the enemies from attacking him from the back, each also killed one abomination after another. Bell's sword sliced through bodies as if not meeting any resistance. Dorn's sledgehammer crushed them like a devastating wrecking ball. Quentin's attacks were not as spectacular, but each abomination wounded by him soon stumbled, convulsed, or simply fell down and died. Even Luster was doing his part, either thrusting his halberd forward like a spear, or using its hook to throw the eyeless beasts off balance and make it easier for others to slay them. Samara had abandoned her sniper nest and moved closer to the crest of the hill to dive into the dome of silence created by Sunny. Her new position was not as advantageous, but she still managed to land most of her shots, although not all of them were able to hit the weak spot on the forehead of the fallen abominations, even those that had not dealt the powerful creatures serious wounds. A few eyeless beasts had managed to slip through the defensive line of the melee vanguard back when the swarm first unleashed its sonic attack. They were already hurtling in her direction with nothing slowing them down. As they did, a hail of bullets suddenly struck the abominations from the side, tearing into their bodies. Kim, who was running up the road, aimed her carbine without ever slowing down and unleashed a rain of charged rounds on the nightmare creatures barreling down on Samara. Reaching the last one, she let go of the weapon and allowed it to hang freely from its sling. The young woman sidestepped the lunge of the rabid monstrosity, then delivered a powerful uppercut with her buckler. As its edge connected with the beast's jaw and jerked the eyeless head up, a slender rapier shot forward, piercing the abomination's neck. A moment later, the beast was dead. Not too long after that, Kim reached the crest, fell on one knee, and took up her carbine once again. Now that the melee vanguard advanced slightly down the road, she had a clear line of fire at the swarm. Firing it in short bursts, the young woman joined the mayhem. Suffocating under the constant flood of frenzied monsters, Sunny grinned. "Dorn, don't try to kill every abomination. Just push them off the cliff when you can. The fall is unlikely to kill them, but we can easily clean up the stragglers later. Luster, disengage, and help Samara regain some essence. The rest continue doing what you're doing, slaughter them all." The members of the cohort obliged, echoing his last command with battle cries of their own. Slaughter them all, slaughter. And so they did. Chapter 848, Persistent Threat. In the end, the cohort eradicated the swarm of the eyeless nightmare creatures. It was not easy, and there were moments when each of them brushed with death. But eventually, the 7 humans observed the vast killing field with tired expressions, exhausted but alive. Hundreds of cut, crushed, and torn bodies littered the broken asphalt of the mountain road. Blood flowed down the hill, pooling into crimson puddles at its base. The carcasses of the fallen abominations towered above the corpses of their lesser ilk like mounds of rotten meat. Looking at the ghastly sight, Sunny felt very happy that the army supplied them with actual food. Right now, he was very reluctant to go back to the familiar diet of only eating monster meat. With a sigh, he turned away and glanced at his ragged band of soldiers. Despite the fact that their battle was over, time was still of the essence. "Luster, go inform the army command that the road is secured, then bring the rhino to the crest and park it on the slope. The rest of you, rest while you can. Oh, and also, good work." The members of the cohort looked at each other, lively smiles appearing on their tired faces. "We did do all right, didn't we?" With that, they walked away from the mass of mangled bodies and sprawled on the ground, steam rising from their blood-covered armors into the cold air. Soon the rhino arrived, its headlights painting a much more morbid picture of the recent battleground. The soldiers rested and recovered their essence. Since no one was seriously injured, Quentin was in no hurry to tend to the wounded. No one stood guard as well, since Sunny's shadows could fulfill that role better than any human. Everything seemed to be peaceful and safe. However, he was not fooled. Down in the valley, the ugly rift in the fabric of reality was still pulsing with eerie darkness, silently calling to Sunny. The gate was still open. Although they had defeated the initial wave of nightmare creatures that had emerged from it, more could arrive at any moment. The first wave was usually the most dangerous, but not always. It ordinarily consisted of the abominations that had been close to the seed of nightmare when it bloomed, but as long as the gate remained open, more monsters could wander through it into the real world. In fact, Sunny suspected that nightmare creatures experienced a call that was very similar to the one that Awakened felt. It drew them from the reaches of the dream realm toward the blooming seed. Those that had been near it arrived first, but many more could eventually come. That was why, if a gate could not be closed, it had to be contained and constantly monitored by the government forces at least near or within the population centers. With time, the number of such containment zones grew, stretching the ability of the government to secure them. So, the cohort was not entirely safe. He stared at the eerie rift for some time, feeling the call slowly eating away at his sanity. Then Sunny shook his head, walked over to the rhino, and sat down in its shadow. He was tired as well. It was time to sort out the results of the battle. Summoning the runes, he thoughtfully studied them. Name Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank Ascended. Class Devil. Shadow Cores 4/7. Shadow Fragments 777 4000. Curses. Despite the scope and ferocity of the recent battle, he had only received 30 or so shadow fragments from it. 4 for killing the Gate Guardian, the rest for slaying the fallen abominations. Since Sunny was ascended now, he gained nothing from slaying nightmare creatures of the dormant and awakened ranks. Becoming a tyrant was not going to be easy. Whatever. He continued to read the runes with a sour expression. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Extraordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Darkwing, Moonlight Shard, Mantle of the Underworld, Weaver's Mask, Broken Oath, Autumn Leaf, Cruel Sight, Covetous Coffer, Undying Chain, Heavenly Burden, Memory of Fire, Memory of Ice, Strike of Thunder, Morgan's Warbow, Shadow Lantern, Bone Singer, Shadow Chair, Overpriced Saddle, Dying Wish, Evil Eye. Sunny had learned to weave names into the memories he created after coming back from the nightmare. Shadow Chair was the exquisite wooden chair he had borrowed from Noctis sadly. No other items Sunny had tried to bring back to the real world survived. Everything had simply ceased to exist once he returned, to his bitter disappointment. However, the artificial memory remained. The overpriced saddle was the stupidly expensive saddle he had commissioned for Nightmare. The Evil Eye was the new memory he had just received for killing the devil named Defiled Witness. There were also a few awakened memories he had gained, but they seemed only good enough to be fed to his shadows. I'll deal with them later. He turned his attention back to the runes. Echoes. Shadows. Marble Saint. Nightmare. Soul Serpent. Attributes: Faded, Flame of Divinity, Master of Shadows, Bloodweave, Boneweave. Aspect: Shadowslave. Aspect rank: Divine. Aspect abilities: Shadow Control, Shadow Step, Shadow Manifestation. Aspect legacy: Shadow Dance. Flaw: Clear Conscience. Dream Anchor. Tower of Longing. The name of the Soul Serpent was dim and lifeless. Sunny could not dismiss or summon the shadow back after gifting it to Rain, at least not from a distance. He still felt a subtle connection to it, though. He knew that Serpent was alive and well. That's something, at least. They are both all right. With a sigh, Sunny concentrated on his new memory, the Evil Eye. After reading the description, he learned that it was capable of enhancing one's vision, making a person capable of discerning more details and seeing things clearly from a greater distance. The effect had to be rather powerful, since it came from a fallen devil, but he had to decide what to do with it. Sunny could either use it himself, feed it to one of his shadows, or give it to one of his soldiers. Samara and Kim were the best candidates. The awakened sharpshooter would be able to pick off targets from much further away, which was an obvious benefit. The timid seer, however, Sunny was very curious to find out how the augmentation of the Evil Eye would affect her ability to see the vulnerabilities of his enemies. After thinking about it for a bit, he turned his head and said, "Hey, Kimmy, come here for a second." Chapter 849, Pincer Maneuver. The Evil Eye seemed to suit Kim's aspect very well. Of course, the cohort was only going to really learn how much it had been improved during their next battle, which without a doubt would follow very soon. But not yet. Sitting on the ground and watching snowflakes dance in the dim sky, Sunny rested and evaluated the performance of his soldiers, and his own, in the clash against the swarm of eyeless beasts. Overall, he was satisfied with the result. Why wouldn't he be, considering that the enemy had been destroyed while none of his subordinates had suffered a serious injury? Everyone had performed well. Belle, Dorn, and Quentin had shown their value as elite combat specialists. Samara had confidently surpassed his already high expectations. Kim had been instrumental to their overall effectiveness and provided adequate support. While Luster's contribution had not seemed that spectacular, his presence actually made all the difference. The young man had also done well enough for himself as a second-line fighter. However, things weren't that simple. A subtle frown appeared on Sunny's face. How troublesome. The relative ease of their victory had been predicated on several factors. Firstly, and most importantly, control over the terrain and the proper use of its advantages. Secondly, the immediate elimination of the fallen commander of the swarm, without the defiled witness. None of the nightmare creatures had possessed fearsome, unnatural powers. The vile abilities that devils and abominations of higher classes possessed added an element of unpredictability to every battle. It was that instability that made any kind of strategy and planning unreliable. This time, Sunny had been able to remove the threat and maintain tactical superiority. But what about the next? He doubted that every future battle would be as orderly. Lastly, the cohort had not held back and unleashed its full power to destroy the swarm. Sunny had avoided using his trump cards, but his reserves of essence were now depleted by more than a half. His soldiers were in an even worse situation. It was going to take a couple of days for them to recover, maybe less if Luster was involved. Sunny did not regret going all out, since it allowed him to create a benchmark of what the cohort was capable of. However, he had a nagging suspicion that they would not be allowed the luxury of carelessly burning through their essence in the future. Who knew when the next combat engagement would come? There was no guarantee that the cohort would receive the time they needed to recharge. Conserving essence is going to be a priority. I feel it in my bones. His expression darkened. The more his soldiers were constrained in how to express their powers, the more risks they would have to endure. Turning his head slightly, Sunny threw a calculating glance at Luster. The young man suddenly shivered and looked back. Captain, why are you staring at me?" Sunny gave him a reassuring smile, which only made Luster appear more nervous, for some reason. "Oh, just thinking about the future. But since we are talking, take Kim and go collect us some soul shards. Don't bother with the fallen abominations, though. Their hides are too tough, so it would be a waste of time to dress them. The army would take care of this." As the officer in charge of the cohort, Sunny was privy to the information about how saturated the soul cores of his subordinates were, not to mention that he could make a rough estimate himself simply by taking a look. Actually, they did not need too many shards. Dorn and Samara had long reached full saturation, while Belle and Quentin were extremely close to it. Only Luster and Kim lagged behind a bit due to their age. The cohort was going to reach its full potential sooner rather than later. As Luster and Kim left, chaperoned by one of his shadows, just in case, Sunny leaned on the hull of the Rhino and closed his eyes. After spending years in the deadly and unpredictable expanse of the Dream Realm, he knew not to miss the rare and precious opportunities to rest. For a while, the small mountain valley was calm and silent. Not too far away, behind the rugged slopes, the bleakness of the twilight sky was being torn apart by orange flashes of heavy artillery fire. The echoes of thunderous explosions reached the valley from time to time, but the mayhem itself remained somewhere in the distance, where the main body of the army division was engaged in a bloody battle against the small horde of nightmare creatures. Soon, however, a low rumbling drew closer, and subtle vibrations spread through the surface of the broken road. Opening one eye, Sunny looked down, where a long column of army vehicles was climbing up the slope. At its front, a squad of war platforms marched, their wide metal feet sending cracks through the asphalt with each step. A few of the smaller ones were holding rifles, not unlike the coil gun wielded by Samara. Of course, in their giant hands, the massive rifles looked small and lightweight, like modest sidearms at most. The battalion whose path the cohort had been ordered to secure finally arrived. They were going to follow the road and flank the horde of abominations, finishing the pincer maneuver. This probably meant that Sunny and his soldiers were done with their short respite. Soon, the towering war platforms reached the crest of the hill where Rhino was parked, lingered there for a moment, and continued down into the valley. The army vehicles and members of the mechanized infantry arrived next, accompanied by a good number of awakened. One of them stopped near the spot where the cohort was resting and glanced at the carnage below. His face paled. The man remained silent for a while, then glanced at Belle, who was relaxing on a boulder nearby. You guys killed all these abominations by yourself?" The swordsman simply smiled. "Sure did." The awakened stared at him incredulously. "But there are hundreds of them." Belle blinked a couple of times, then shrugged. "So, we're irregulars." The soldier opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Bell, meanwhile, thought for a bit and added, don't be too impressed. Our captain probably killed half of them. We just stayed back and tried to make ourselves useful. The awakened soldier was clearly impressed. He looked at the swordsman with begrudging respect, remained silent for a few moments, and asked, "Who is your captain?" Bell suddenly laughed. "Our captain. He is the devil himself." Chapter 850, Surrounded. At that moment, Samara appeared from the hatch of the Rhino and called out to Sonny, "Captain, we are being hailed on the comms." He sighed, then opened his eyes and reluctantly stood up. As the awakened soldier stared at the pale young man with wide eyes, he smiled pleasantly and then disappeared without a trace, prompting the man to flinch and take a step back. Back inside the APC, Sonny emerged from the shadows, walked over to the communication suite, and sat down behind a terminal. At the press of a button, Master Jet's face appeared on the screen. Soul Reaper seemed to be standing in front of a pile of mangled corpses, illuminated by an angry orange glow. Dancing flames reflected in her icy blue eyes, making it seem as if they were glowing. Set against that backdrop, her smile looked rather sinister. "Hey, Sonny. I heard that your cohort won its first battle. I guess congratulations are in order?" He nodded and studied the carcasses of nightmare creatures behind her. "Yeah, you seem to have achieved a victory as well. What's the situation like with the other divisions?" The field army had separated into 7 divisions after reaching the Antarctic Center, or was it brigades? Sonny was still a bit confused about the hierarchy of army units. In any case, one of them had stayed behind in Falcon Scott, while the other 6 had deployed south and were currently on the move. Each consisted of 10 to 15,000 soldiers and was accompanied by 700 awakened or so. Master Jet shrugged. "It's not too bad yet. The irregulars are doing their job as well. For now, everything seems to be going according to plan. What about you? How did your cohort perform?" Sonny sighed. "Not bad. We mopped up the opposition easily enough. However, we wasted a lot of essence. If the intensity of the conflict picks up, I'm not sure if I can employ the same strategy again." She nodded. "It will definitely pick up, so good thinking." At that moment, something thundered from the dynamics, and the image on the screen became noisy for a few moments. Soul Reaper lowered her communicator and looked somewhere to the side with a resentful expression. She pursed her lips, then said in a neutral tone, "Anyway, I have to go. Follow the flanking battalion for now and help them deal with the horde that's blocking your division from advancing south. Don't exert yourself and your soldiers, though. Take it easy and conserve your essence." Sonny smiled. "Will do." Master Jet glanced at him briefly and nodded. "Good luck, Sonny." He sighed. "Good luck to you, too." However, the signal had already cut, turning the screen black. All that remained was his pale reflection. Sonny lingered for a few moments, then shook his head and headed toward the exit hatch of the Rhino. Nothing much had changed outside. The sky was still cold, dim, and illuminated by the distant cannonade of human artillery. In the valley below, the Army engineers were setting up autonomous observation posts around the active gate and laying explosive charges around it. While humanity could not close every gate, it had learned to diminish their threat in various ways over the years. Encasing them in cement or burying the rift under tons of soil were just a couple of methods to slow down the emerging nightmare creatures, at least a little. Another group of support personnel was already cleaning up the road and harvesting the soul shards. Sonny could have made a point about securing his share of the spoils, but it was too much hassle. The results would be tallied and converted to an appropriate amount of contribution points anyway. Plus, Luster and Kim were already back with their trophies, stepping out of the APC. Sonny looked at his soldiers. "Gather up." As the cohort assembled around him, he pointed to the glimmering crystals. "Those with unsaturated cores, share the soul shards among yourself and absorb them. We have 10 minutes to get ready to move out. Our next task is to support the assault on the flank of the bunch of abominations making a ruckus on the other side of the mountain. Only dormant abilities and passive enchantments this time, so don't get too rowdy. Once the threat is eliminated, we can get some sleep." Understood? There were no questions. 10 minutes later, the Rhino joined the column of the army vehicles and rolled forward, in the direction where the flashes of light and the sounds of explosions were coming from. The flanking battalion passed the small valley, climbed high up the slope of the mountain, then crested a narrow pass and came in view of a massive battle below. Around 2,000 nightmare creatures were pressing down on the defensive line of a well-organized human force. The soldiers were not in a hurry to attack and concentrated on keeping the abominations away from themselves. The barrage of explosive shells, squall of slugs unleashed by the towering war platforms, and countless soldiers of the mechanized infantry, and several hundred awakened were doing a good job of containing the raging horde. Looking at the chaotic battlefield from above, Sonny grimaced. At this distance, the 6 nightmare gates that had disgorged the horde were already whispering into his ears. This is going to get old really fast, isn't it? The Army Command soon sent them a packet of information, marking down priority targets in the mass of abominations and transferring other important data. As the battalion formed to start the assault on the flank of the enemy force, Sonny studied it all and then pointed at an especially ugly monstrosity. That will be our target. We must take this gate guardian down. You guys help me clear the path to the big bastard, then stay back. Sure. Master Jet had told him to take it easy, but Sonny was not going to miss a chance to earn a few shadow fragments. His eyes gleamed with bloodlust, making the members of the cohort shift uncomfortably. Soon the preparations were done, and the flanking force attacked. At the same time, the main body of the division changed its routine, initiating a charge of their own. Pressed between the two, the horde of nightmare creatures stood no chance. Of course, the battalion attacking from the slope of the mountain, and the irregulars accompanying it, got it much worse than the rest of the human force. Nevertheless, the resistance of the abominations was quickly crushed, and they were ruthlessly eradicated. Sonny managed to take down another gate guardian as well. As the exhausted soldiers celebrated the decisive victory, he scowled deeply and then looked south. The whispers assaulting his mind were growing stronger and stronger. A moment later, the ground shook, and the fabric of reality seemed to split open in the distance. Sonny closed his eyes for a moment. 1, 2, 3. As he watched with a weary expression, several new nightmare gates suddenly tore a path into the waking world. Then, even more. The shocked soldiers rushed to get back into formations, while countless abominations were appearing from the rifts, flooding the air with their frenzied howls and shrieks. Worse still, one of the gates opened directly behind the army, putting it into an encirclement. Standing on top of the corpse of the massive guardian, Sonny sighed and shook his head dejectedly. This is going to be a long day. Well, of course it would be. Since they were in Antarctica, this day was going to last for another few weeks, and then turn into a night that would last for many months. He had a feeling that this endless night would feel even longer.